Cowboy Scrooge Worth Saving, written by Lucy McConnell and read by several AI-generated voices.
Welcome to a Christmas like you've never seen before, out on the ranch where wide open skies meet the warmth of holiday magic, and our cowboy Scrooge finds himself tangled in more than just twinkling lights. In this modern retelling of a beloved classic, you'll follow a rugged rancher who's let the hardships of life harden his heart, only to be reminded of the love, joy, and second chances that the Christmas spirit can bring. With a touch of romance and a whole lot of heart, this story will make you laugh, swoon, and maybe even shed a tear or two. So saddle up for a festive ride. I promise by the end you'll be longing for more holiday cheer and maybe even planning your own Christmas under the stars. Enjoy the journey and remember, miracles can happen even on the toughest trails. Warmest holiday wishes.
Chapter 1. As told by Ebenezer Scrooge. I groaned and smacked the snooze button, burying my face in the pillow to block out the gray light of dawn filtering through the windows. Christmas Eve, another day filled with unnecessary cheer and goodwill, as if putting on a jolly face could erase the challenges and burdens of ranch life. Bah, I grumbled. I dragged my sorry self out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath my feet because I turned the thermostat down to 65 before going to bed. Sleeping in a cold room was good for your health, or so they used to say. After splashing water on my face and tugging on my work clothes, I headed downstairs. The coffee pot, left over from when the house used to bustle to life each morning, burbled and hissed at me. I glared back at its cheery good morning, finding my thermos on the drying rack. Outside, the air was sharp and bracing, blowing the few trees on the property about as if they were already made of paper. The scent of pine, hay, and dryer sheets hung in the mudroom, where I slipped on my boots. Light snow had fallen overnight, dusting the pastures and barns in white, though none of it was wet enough to stick together. Like the dust in the summer, the snow lifted and swirled in the wind. I trudged through the powder to the stable, my boots leaving tracks that trailed behind me like ghosts. As I entered the barn, the rich smells of leather and horseflesh enveloped me. Bob, my ranch hand, was already there throwing hay to the horses, his dark hair poking out from under his tan cowboy hat. He was a young thing with an even younger wife when he knocked on my door 3 years ago asking for a job. I'd hired him on the spot, knowing a willing back was as good as a strong one, and a young one would work for half the pay. He glanced up as I approached. "Mornin', Mr. Scrooge," he said, his voice soft. I grunted in response, grabbed a shovel, and got to work cleaning out the stalls. We labored in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of hay and the scrape of the shovel the only sounds. I may be in my 30s, but I'd be darned if Bob would outwork me today or any day, for that matter. Bob cleared his throat. "Martha isn't feeling too good today," he said, not looking me in the eye. I frowned, leaning the shovel against the wall. Christmas Eve, and he was looking for a reason to take off early. I could spot a con man from 10 miles out. "Your wife's no concern of mine," I said gruffly. "We've got work needs doin'. Those fences on the north pasture need mend, and the herd could use a head count." I turned to face him squarely. "I expect you to put this ranch first, you hear? Especially in winter when every penny counts." Bob ducked his head. "Yes, sir," he mumbled. "I'll get it done." "See that you do," I said, my tone sharp. I watched him hurry off through the sliding door, a twinge of guilt pricking my conscience. Bob worked hard every day of the year, and not once had he taken a sick day. I shook it off. Sentimentality had no place in business. I spent the rest of the morning surveying my portion of the Thunder Basin Ranch. The snow crunched underfoot as I walked the perimeter of the barnyard, checking for damaged fences or signs of predators. Just beyond the homestead, the cattle huddled together for warmth, their breath puffing out in pale clouds. Overhead, a hawk circled, its piercing cry echoing across the valley. A scavenger eager to pick apart my profits, no doubt. I swore at the few shingles missing from the barn's roof, likely blown off in last week's windstorm. I made a mental note to have Bob patch it later. Loath as I was to admit it, maintaining the barn was crucial to the bottom line. I continued on, the sun climbing higher as the morning wore on. The glare off the snow made me squint.
I paused to take a swig of now cold coffee from my thermos, the taste bitter on my tongue.
As I surveyed Cratchit loading hay bales into the back of the truck to take out to the herd, a sense of pride filled my chest. This land, this business, was my legacy. Through long days of backbreaking labor and shrewd financial stewardship, I'd transformed my half of my parents' struggling homestead into one of the most productive spreads in the county. My sister, Marley, had the other half on the other side of the hill. I had no idea how she fared. The earth could have dropped off at our fence lines for all I knew about the goings-on over there. Lost in thought, I barely noticed when I reached the house. It was nearing cold enough to freeze pipes, so I took a moment to start a fire in the wood stove. A cracked pipe was more expensive to fix than the wood I'd burned. I went to my office, ready to bury myself in account ledgers and work orders. But as I sorted through the never-ending stack of bills, a flash of pink caught my eye. It was a letter addressed in the looping script I would recognize anywhere, Marley. My jaw tightened. After our parents passed, Marley and I disagreed bitterly over how the ranch should be run. Unable to settle our differences, we'd split the property in two. I couldn't say that I missed her meddling or her chipper son, who always seemed to be underfoot. I picked up the envelope, turning it over in my hands before finally ripping it open. Marley's message was brief, her usual pleasantries interspersed with vague mentions of health issues and financial hardship. I scanned quickly. Time was money, but the final lines gave me pause. Life is too short and unpredictable to let the past keep us apart. I miss you, Eben. This Christmas, I hope we can put aside our differences and be a family again. If not for us, then for Mama and Daddy's sake. Bah. I tossed the letter aside. Did she think a few honeyed words could erase years of resentment? Marley never could stomach the tough choices needed to keep a business afloat. Her focus on family had always been a liability. No, my way was the only way, even if it meant bearing the load alone. Pushing away the pang in my chest, I reached for my ledger and threw the letter in the trash. I had neither the time nor inclination for such foolishness. With only the crackle of the wood stove for company, I focused on columns of numbers, my solitary kingdom of logic and pragmatism. Beyond the window, the sun tracked its familiar path across the steely sky, just another Christmas Eve on the ranch.
Chapter 2. As told by Dr. Emily Wilson. I smiled at Mrs. Johnson as I finished her appointment, the last one of the morning on this wonderful Christmas Eve. The soft instrumental carols playing through the speaker and the twinkling white lights strung along the walls of my cozy OBGYN office lent a festive air to the space. "The decorations are lovely, Dr. Wilson," Mrs. Johnson remarked as she gathered her purse. "Thank you," I replied warmly, walking her to the door. "I've always loved Christmas. I guess it shows, huh?" We both chuckled as I opened the door for her. Sarah, my receptionist, glanced up from her computer and flashed us a bright smile. Her reindeer antler headband bobbed with emotion. "Mrs. Johnson, don't forget your next appointment is at the end of January," Sarah reminded her. "And happy holidays." "You too. Thank you both so much." Mrs. Johnson turned to me. "Have a wonderful Christmas," I said, lightly touching her shoulder as she headed out. After she left, I walked over to the reception desk. "Sarah, thank you again for coming in for a few hours this morning. I really appreciate you being here, especially on Christmas Eve. With Christmas being on a Friday and our office closed on the weekends, we had to see a couple of patients now so that next week wasn't too stressful for us or the expectant mothers." "It's no problem at all, Dr. Wilson," Sarah assured me. "I'm always happy to help out. Besides, it's not like I have big plans today anyway. I'll have plenty of time to get ready for my family's dinner tonight." I nodded, feeling grateful for her dedication and positive attitude. I was lucky to find someone so flexible. Sarah's eyes widened. "I almost forgot. Someone needs to take the big box of toys to the feed store today. Santa is supposed to pick them up this afternoon to deliver them to the kids in need tonight. I can do that." I glanced at the cardboard box sitting near the coat rack, filled with dolls, stuffed animals, toy trucks and games that we had collected from patients and staff over the past month. Participating in the toy drive was one of my favorite holiday traditions. I could easily work in a stop at the feed store. I had several errands to run today, and it wasn't even lunchtime yet. Sarah shook her head slightly, her expression warm. "I don't know how you do it all, Dr. Wilson. Working at the office, delivering babies, volunteering, and taking the Christmas Eve shift at the hospital too. I laughed, shrugging off the compliment even as I felt my cheeks warm at the praise. I don't know about that. Working on Christmas Eve lets some of the other doctors be home with their kids. It's really not a big deal. Just then, the phone trilled on Sarah's desk. She glanced at the display. Looks like we have a nervous first-time mom online too, she said, arching an eyebrow at me. Want me to take a message? No, I've got it, I replied, already reaching for the phone. I have a few minutes before I need to head out. I picked up the receiver and raised it to my ear. Hi there, this is Dr. Emily Wilson. How can I help you today? Dr. Wilson, thank goodness, a tight, anxious female voice greeted me. It's Martha Cratchit. I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve, but I'm just so uncomfortable. As the words poured out of her in a jumbled rush, I listened attentively, my brow furrowing. I could hear the strain and worry in her voice. She was really scared. I'm sorry you're feeling this way, Martha, I said gently when she paused for a breath. Can you tell me a little more about your symptoms? I'm having a lot of back pain and just feel so achy all over. I've been trying to tough it out because I know some discomfort is normal, but I made a sympathetic noise. You poor thing. Back pain and overall achiness are common complaints, especially in the third trimester, as your body adjusts to the weight of the growing baby. Have you felt the baby moving today? Yes, Martha said, sounding a bit less distressed at the question. He or she is quite the little wiggle worm in there. Good, that's a great sign, I assured her. Feeling the baby's usual movements meant things were likely okay, but her level of discomfort concerned me. And if this was her first pregnancy, the unfamiliar sensations were probably extra frightening. Tell you what, let's set up an appointment for you to come see me on Monday. That way, I can check things out and hopefully provide some relief or suggestions to help you feel better. Really? Martha exhaled loudly, her relief palpable even through the phone. That would be great, Dr. Wilson, thank you. I know it's a busy time with the holidays. If you start feeling worse before then, don't hesitate to go to the hospital, all right? I'm working there later today. You're working on Christmas Eve? Martha sounded surprised. I am indeed, I replied lightly. Sarah, her warm brown eyes sparkling beneath her reindeer antler headband, had been following the conversation and already had the schedule pulled up on the computer screen. She flipped the monitor around so I could see it better, her dark curls bouncing with emotion. Is 11 a.m. on Monday okay for you? After finalizing the appointment details and reassuring Martha once more, I hung up, tapping my manicured nails absently on the desk. The knot of worry in my stomach slowly eased. First-time moms often needed extra support and reassurance. I was glad I'd be seeing her soon. Glancing at the clock, Sarah made a shooing motion with her hands, the red and green bangles on her wrist jingling merrily. I can finish up here and lock the door. You're the best, Sarah. Thanks again and have a wonderful Christmas. I flashed her a quick smile, my hazel eyes crinkling at the corners as I gathered up the toy donation box, purse and coat. I ran a hand through my long blonde hair, releasing it from the neat ponytail before slipping on my jacket. You too, Dr. Wilson. Stay warm out there. I stepped out of the office into the chilly afternoon air, balancing the large box against my hip as I navigated the salted walkway. The sun shone brightly despite the cold, glinting off the mounds of snow pushed to the edges of the parking lot. I breathed in deeply, the sharp scent of pine from the little tree lot across the street mingling with the wet wool smell of my coat. My mind was caught between mentally reviewing my patient charts and an odd heaviness in my chest that I couldn't quite place. With God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen playing softly over the radio and no one to see me break down, I finally let myself acknowledge the dull ache that had taken up residence behind my breastbone. The truth was, as much as I loved my work and truly didn't mind covering the holiday shift, a part of me dreaded the prospect of yet another Christmas Eve spent alone. I was without the one person I wanted to spend Christmas with before everything fell apart. I closed my eyes briefly, resting my forehead against the cold steering wheel. Even now, years later, the memory of Ebenezer Scrooge's handsome face arose effortlessly in my mind. His sharp cheekbones, the furrow between his brows, the startling clarity of his blue eyes, as he looked at me with such love it stole my breath away. A swift and piercing pang went through me. It was easier to breathe through than the yawning sense of loss that threatened to swallow me every time I thought of him, of the future we almost had, of the family we never got to build together. Shaking my head fiercely, I muttered to myself, "Stop it, Emily," as I jammed the key into the ignition. Don't do this today. But even as I navigated the slushy streets, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting into the past to memories of a time when Ebenezer's easy smiles warmed me more thoroughly than any cup of cocoa, when the love between us rivaled the beauty of any Christmas lights. No matter how much time passed, it seemed my heart refused to learn. I was young enough to have a family to start fresh with someone new. However, a part of me would always be that hopelessly romantic girl who believed in soulmates, in a love that could overcome anything. The girl who had fallen desperately, completely in love with the most complicated and captivating man she'd ever met. And even though that girl had been broken, shattered by the very love she'd thought would last forever, she still couldn't let him go. Not completely. Not in the deepest recesses of her heart where his memory lived on, painful and precious. Not enough to fall for someone else, though heaven knew I'd tried. I would never love anyone like I'd loved Ebenezer Scrooge. He had imprinted himself on my very soul. I could only hope that burying myself in work would eventually scab over the wound his absence had left behind. That continuing to show up, day after day, to care for others and make a small difference in my corner of the world would somehow patch the emptiness in me.
Chapter 3. As told by Bob Cratchit. I hurried through my morning duties at the ranch, consumed with worry for Martha. As I filled water troughs, I couldn't shake the memory of her pale, drawn face and how she winced as she rubbed her belly. She had assured me she would be fine, but the concern in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. When I finished the last of my morning tasks, I practically sprinted to my rusty pickup truck, eager to check on her during my lunch break. The back tires slipped on the dirt road covered in ice. I meant to replace the tires, but we needed every penny to pay the upcoming hospital bill. My heart pounded in rhythm with the rumble of the old engine. As I turned onto the narrow strip of dirt road, our small modular home came into view. The faded blue siding and tidy postage stamp yard stood out against the rugged Wyoming landscape, a precious oasis of warmth and love amidst the harsh wilderness. The large chicken coop stood off to one side. Martha kept the chickens for both houses. Scrooge didn't want to bother with the birds, claiming they were too much of a bother to be worth the time they took. He didn't complain about the fresh eggs, though, and Martha enjoyed tending the flock. She even gave them silly names and chatted to them as she cleaned their lay boxes. I'd been caring for them lately and probably would for a while. The extra chore didn't bother me one bit, as I knew how much Martha cared about the birds. I pulled into the driveway and leaped out of the truck, barely remembering to slam the door shut behind me in my haste. Salt crunched beneath my work boots as I jogged up the front path that I'd shoveled that morning before work and pushed open the storm door, the familiar creak of the hinges doing little to soothe my racing thoughts. Stepping into our cozy living room, my gaze immediately fell on Martha, lying on the second-hand couch we'd picked up at a yard sale last summer. The sight of her sent a pang through my chest. She looked so small and fragile, curled up on the cushions, one hand resting protectively on the swell of her stomach. The early afternoon sun slanted through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room and highlighting the care Martha put into making our modest house a home. The light blue carpet bore the telltale parallel lines of frequent vacuuming, and the scratched but clean linoleum gleamed in the kitchen. A stack of parenting books sat neatly on the coffee table, dog-eared and bookmarked, a testament to the love and preparation we poured into welcoming our first child. As I entered, Martha opened her eyes and managed a tired smile. "Bob," she murmured, struggling to sit up. "I didn't expect you home so soon." I knelt beside the couch and took her small hand in mine, feeling the calluses on her palm from the countless hours spent cleaning and readying our home for the baby. "I've been worried about you all morning. How are you feeling?" Her smile wavered slightly, and she glanced away. "I'll be all right," she assured me, but her voice lacked its usual strength. "I'm just a bit tired and sore. It's normal at this stage." I frowned, unconvinced. She shifted uncomfortably on the cushions, her free hand alternating between rubbing her belly and pressing against her lower back. She'd been having more and more of these spells lately, and it seemed like the pain was getting worse no matter how much she tried to downplay it. "Martha," I said gently, reaching out to caress her cheek, "I really think you should call the doctor just to be safe. I hate seeing you like this." She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. She assured me. "I have an appointment scheduled for Monday." I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that everything would be fine. But I couldn't shake the sense of unease that hung over me like a heavy fog. My eyes drifted to the wooden crib sitting in the corner of the living room, the one we'd painstakingly sanded and repainted together, dreaming of the day we'd lay our precious baby inside. Looking at it now, a wave of fierce protectiveness surged through me. I silently prayed for Martha's health and the well-being of our unborn child, vowing to do whatever it took to keep them safe and provided for. Martha followed my gaze and squeezed my hand. "Bob, you should head back to work," she said softly. "I know how much we need this job. I'll be okay here, I promise." I hesitated, torn between my desperate desire to stay by her side and the knowledge that we couldn't afford for me to lose Scrooge's favor. The medical bills alone would be a strain, not to mention the cost of diapers and all the other necessities that came with a new baby. Swallowing hard, I leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "All right?" I relented, my voice rough with emotion. "Promise you'll call me if anything changes. Okay? I'll keep my phone on me. I can be back here in 10 minutes if you need me." She smiled, a touch of color returning to her cheeks. "I will. Now go on, before Scrooge comes looking for you himself." With a final squeeze of her hand, I forced myself to stand and step away from the couch. Every fiber of my being protested, leaving her, but I had no choice. As I pulled on my coat and heavy work gloves, I paused in the doorway, drinking at the sight of her. Despite the exhaustion lining her face, she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, the love of my life, the mother of my child. "I love you," I said roughly, my throat tight with emotion. "I love you too," she replied, her smile soft and warm. "Be safe out there." With a nod, I stepped outside, the cold wind biting my cheeks and stinging my eyes. Or maybe it was unshed tears. I blinked them away as I trudged back to my truck. The drive back to the ranch passed in a blur, my mind too consumed with worry to focus on the familiar landscape flying by outside my window. Instead, my thoughts drifted back over the path Martha and I had shared to get where we are now. We'd met in high school, two starry-eyed kids from opposite sides of the tracks. She was the preacher's daughter, kind and gentle and loved by all. I was the ranch hand's son, rough around the edges and maybe a little too quick to throw a punch. Somehow, despite our differences, we'd fallen head over heels in love. It hadn't been easy, especially in the beginning. Her parents didn't approve of me, convinced I'd never amount to anything more than a hired hand. And if I'm being honest, there were times I almost believed them. Times when the weight of our financial struggles and the pressure of trying to build a life together felt like it would crush me. But Martha never wavered. She believed in me, in us, with a faith that humbled me to my core. She's my rock, my guiding light through every storm we weathered together. And the Lord knows there have been plenty of those over the years. We got married young, barely out of our teens. Everyone said we were crazy and that it would never last. But we've proved them wrong so far. Through late nights and long hours, penny pinching and going without, we built a life for ourselves. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And now, with our first baby on the way, everything was about to change again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Midnight feedings, diaper changes, doctor's bills piling up. It was enough to make even the bravest man quake in his boots. But as long as I have Martha by my side, I could face anything. As the ranch came into view, I took a deep, steadying breath, squaring my shoulders beneath my heavy Carhartt coat. No matter the challenges, I would find a way to give my family the life they deserved. The life I'd promised Martha when I slid that ring on her finger and vowed to love and cherish her for the rest of my days. I parked the truck and hopped out, the cold air burning my lungs as I hurried toward the barn. Scrooge was inside. I took one last moment to pray silently for Martha and our unborn child, then squared my jaw and marched forward to meet whatever challenges this Christmas Eve had in store. Because that's what love does. It gives you strength you never knew you had, makes you brave in the face of fear, and carries you through the darkest times, always guiding you back home. I felt that love burning bright in my chest as I entered the barn. For Martha, for our baby, For the future, I was determined to build for us one day at a time. No matter how grumpy Scrooge was today, I wouldn't let him ruin my Christmas faith. Not today, not ever.
Chapter 4. As told by Eben. The not-so-savory aroma of canned chili wafted up from the steaming bowl before me, its tendrils of steam curling and dancing in the winter light streaming through the kitchen windows. I sat at the sturdy oak table, which had been in my family for generations, and lifted a spoonful of the hearty beans and half-gone spices to my lips. The warmth spread through my chest as I swallowed, a momentary comfort against the chill that seemed to have seeped into my bones. I had just taken another mouthful when a sharp knock at the front door shattered the midday quiet. Grumbling under my breath, I set the spoon down with a clatter and pushed back from the table. The floorboards creaked beneath my socks as I strode to the entryway, annoyance simmering in my veins. Who in tarnation would be bothering me in the middle of the day on Christmas Eve? I yanked open the door, ready to give whatever poor soul stood on the other side a piece of my mind, but the words died on my tongue as I took in the figure huddled on my porch. Marley? My sister stood before me, her dark hair whipping around her face. She was bundled in a heavy coat, her hands tucked deep into her pockets. The tension lines around her eyes and mouth were deeper than I'd ever seen them. "Hello, Ebenezer," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, torn between the instinct to slam the door in her face and the curiosity that gnawed at my gut. Marley and I hadn't spoken in years, not since our last argument over the ranch's finances. What could have possibly brought her to my doorstep today of all days? With a curt nod, I stepped aside, allowing her to brush past me into the semi-warmth of the house. She stamped the snow from her boots on the mat and unwound her scarf as I shut the door behind her, cutting off the frigid draft that had followed her inside. That would cost me another 2 pieces of wood. I led her to the kitchen where my half-eaten bowl of chili still sat on the table. Marley slid into the chair across from mine, her piercing blue eyes, so like my own, locked onto my face with an intensity that made me want to squirm. Marley ignored my barbed comment. Her expression remained somber and thoughtful. She clasped her hands on the tabletop, her fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles turned white. Her wedding bang practically hung off her hand. She'd lost weight. "Ebenezer, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Something happened to me that changed everything." I raised a skeptical eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Marley took a deep breath as if steeling herself before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I had well, they called it an episode, but it was bad, real bad. My heart skittered and then stopped and then pounded," she said, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. "I was alone in the barn when it happened. I thought I was going to die there, Ebenezer. I could feel my life slipping away." I felt a jolt of something sharp and unfamiliar in my chest at her words, but I quickly tamped it down. "Well, you didn't," I said gruffly. "You're still here, aren't you?" Marley nodded, a faraway look in her eyes. "I am. But in those moments, when I was hovering between this world and the next, I saw something, Eben. Something that shook me to my core. The hair on the back of my neck prickled with a sudden, inexplicable unease. I had never been one for talk of the supernatural or the divine, preferring to keep my feet firmly planted in the realm of the balance sheets and bank statements. I didn't want to listen to the whispered promises of otherworldly visions and celestial encounters. The idea of entertaining such notions made me shiver as if some unseen presence had brushed against me in the shadows. I clenched my jaw. "I saw heaven," Marley whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "It was so beautiful, so peaceful. And in that moment, I understood what truly matters in this life. Not money, not power, not success, but love, Ebenezer. Love and compassion and connection with others." I scoffed, the sound harsh and grating even to my own ears. "Bah! There's no money in love. It's worthless." Marley's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and pity. She leaned forward, her voice rising with conviction. "That's where you're wrong, little brother. Love is worth priceless. It's the only thing that endures, the only thing that gives our lives meaning. And you've turned your back on it, on the people who care about you, for what? A few extra dollars in your pocket." I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tightly that my teeth ground together. How dare she lecture me about love and meaning, as if she had any idea what I'd been through, what I'd sacrificed to keep this ranch afloat. You don't understand, I growled, my hands balling into fists at my sides. I've built something here, Marley, something real and lasting. The ranch, the business, that's what matters. That's what will endure long after we're both gone. It's all we have left of Mom and Dad. Do you really think that all of this, she gestured around the kitchen at the sprawling ranch beyond the windows, is all the left of us? What about the memories? The laughter that filled this room day after day? None of this will mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with. I opened my mouth to retort, but the words stuck in my throat. Unbidden, an image flashed through my mind, a memory of a long time ago when family and warmth filled these same walls. When our parents were still alive, and Marley and I were young and carefree, our bond unbreakable. The sound of our laughter drifted over me like ghosts. Marley must have seen something in my expression because her own softened, the lines of tension around her eyes easing. Do you remember what Mom and Dad used to say, she asked quietly, about the true meaning of Christmas? I swallowed hard, the tightness in my chest growing. Of course I remembered. How could I forget? It had been drilled into us since we were old enough to understand the words. Christmas isn't about the presents or the feasts, Marley recited, her voice distant and wistful. It's about being with those we love and celebrating the blessings we've been given. I turned away, unable to meet her gaze. Those words, once so cherished, now felt like a knife twisting in my gut. What blessings did I have to celebrate? What joy could I find in a life spent alone, haunted by the ghosts of my past? Those happy memories were shards of glass, cutting away at the net I'd placed around my heart when our parents died. Marley rose from her chair. She crossed the kitchen to stand before me, her hand resting on my arm. I flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. It's not too late, Ebenezer, she said softly, her eyes searching mine. You can find your way back to the man you used to be, the man who knew how to love and open his heart to others. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. And what would you have me do, Marley? Go caroling door to door, throw a grand Christmas feast for the whole town? I'm a businessman, not a dang philanthropist. Marley sighed, her hand falling away from my arm. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Ebenezer. I'm just asking you to remember what truly matters. To think about the choices you've made and the path you're on. Is this really the life you want for yourself? I didn't answer, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. Marley studied my face for a long moment, her own etched with a sorrow that made her seem far older than her years. I should go, she said finally, stepping back. I've said my piece. Just think about what I've told you, Ebenezer. Please, before it's too late. I watched her go, a part of me wanting to call out to beg her to stay. But I remained silent, rooted to the spot as if by some unseen force. At the kitchen doorway, Marley paused, her hand resting on the frame. She looked back at me, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I hope you find your way back to love, Ebenezer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's the only thing that truly matters in this world, or the next. The sound of the front door closing behind her echoed through the suddenly too quiet house. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where she had been. Her words played repeatedly in my mind, like a tune I couldn't shake. Find my way back to love? What did that even mean? I had love in my life, the love of my work, my land, my own company. What more did I need? And yet, as I sank back into my chair at the kitchen table, the bowl of chili before me now cold and unappetizing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The life I had built for myself, the one I had once been so proud of, was somehow hollow. I thought of Marley's face, the desperation and sorrow in her eyes as she pleaded with me to change. I thought of Bob Cratchit, out there in the barn, working himself to the bone to provide for his growing family. I thought of Emily. No, I couldn't go there. Not now, not ever. That door had closed a long time ago, and no amount of Christmas magic or supernatural visions could change that. I pushed the bowl away, my appetite gone. The house suddenly felt too small, too confining. I needed air, needed space to clear my head. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door and shrugged it on, stepping out into the biting cold. The wind whipped at my face, stinging my eyes and nose, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me that I was alive and that I wasn't some ghost doomed to wander the earth alone for eternity. I set off across the ranch, my boots crunching through the snow. I had no destination in mind, no goal other than to escape the suffocating weight of Marley's words. Even as I put distance between me and her visit, my mind churning with dark thoughts and bitter memories, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That the world I had so carefully constructed around myself was beginning to crack and crumble, revealing glimpses of a truth I had long tried to deny. Love, connection, joy. The things I had once believed in, the things that had once made my life worth living. Were they obtainable for a miser like me? I didn't think so. I didn't think so. Chapter 5. Also told by Eben. The barn was alive with the sounds of horses whickering and hooves shuffling against the straw-covered floor as I worked, the rhythmic scrape of my shovel against the wooden boards providing a steady backdrop. The rich scent of hay and horse sweat filled my nostrils, a familiar and not unpleasant aroma that spoke of hard work and simple living. Lost in my thoughts, my body moved through the motions with practiced ease. The creak of the barn door snapped me back to the present. Bob stood in the doorway, his worn cowboy hat clutched in his hands and a sheepish expression on his face. "Mr. Scrooge," he said, his voice hesitant, "I hate to bother you, but we've run out of chicken feed. I went to grab a new bag and the storage bin was empty." I grumbled under my breath, setting my shovel aside and wiping the sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. It was just like Bob to wait until the last minute to tell me something like this. And on Christmas Eve, no less, when the feed store would close early. "You couldn't have mentioned this yesterday?" I asked, my tone sharp. You know how Wilson is about his hours during the holidays. I bought the feed for the chickens in exchange for Martha taking care of them. It had always been my mother's job, and after she passed, I couldn't stand to see reminders of her pecking through the barnyard. Shipping them off to Cratchit's was a win-win. Bob shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know, Mr. Scrooge. I'm sorry. I meant to check the supply earlier in the week, but with Martha being so poorly and all, it slipped my mind." I waved off his excuses with a dismissive hand. "Fine. I'll go into town and pick up what we need. But next time, try to think ahead a little, would you? We can't afford to let things slip just because it's Christmas." "Thank you, sir. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," I replied, already mentally calculating how much feed we'd need to get through the next few weeks. "And Bob, while I'm gone, see if you can patch that hole in the roof. The last thing we need is moldy hay." "I'll get right on it," Bob assured me, backing out of the barn with a grateful smile. "And thanks again, Mr. Scrooge. I really appreciate it." I grunted in response, returning to my work as the barn door swung shut behind him. It wasn't that I minded making the trip into town, not really, but the idea of having to rearrange my day because someone else hadn't been on top of things grated on me. There was nothing for it now. I finished my chores as quickly as I could, then headed back to the house to clean up and change into something a little less covered in horse manure. I splashed cold water on my face at the kitchen sink, the icy shock of it chasing away the last vestiges of my irritation. I stopped at the door to grab my good hat and stared at myself in the mirror, wondering if I looked as old as I felt on the inside. I didn't have wrinkles, not many, anyway. My hair was still thick, and I moved like someone who was young. Maybe one day I'd hunch over and shuffle, not today. I refused to bow under life's burdens. As I drove into town, the snow-covered landscape glittered in the weak winter sunlight, the barren fields and skeletal trees transformed into something almost beautiful by the pristine white blanket. I tried to ignore the festive decorations that adorned the storefronts and houses I passed, focusing instead on the task at hand. Wilson's Feed and Seed was a ramshackle old building on the outskirts of town, its weathered wooden exterior and faded hand-painted sign a testament to its long-standing history. As I pulled into the gravel parking lot, I noticed that the store was unusually busy, with a steady stream of customers coming and going, their arms laden with last-minute purchases. Great, now I'd have to wait in line to pay. I went inside, the tinkling bell above the door announcing my arrival. The store was warm and dimly lit, the air heavy with the scents of hay, grain, and new leather. I nodded a greeting to Wilson himself, who manned the register with his usual efficiency. "Storm's coming in, Scrooge. Might want to put that plow on your truck." I bristled, not liking being told what to do. I gave him a non-committal wave and headed towards the back where the chicken feed was kept. As I scanned the shelves, looking for the specific brand and type of feed I preferred, I couldn't help but notice the array of holiday goods that had taken over the store's limited floor space, the metal shelves groaning under the weight of the seasonal merchandise. There were toy tractors and horses jostled for room with dolls and tiny pink cowgirl boots. I shook my head, bemused by the excess of it all. Who had time for such frivolities, especially in a place like this? But even as the thought crossed my mind, I felt a pang of something that might have been nostalgia or perhaps regret. I remembered a time when the sight of a shiny new toy under the Christmas tree could fill me with a joy so fierce it bordered on painful, a time when the love of my family had been enough to chase away even the deepest of winter's chills. Lost in my memories, I didn't notice the man standing beside me until he spoke, his voice warm and achingly familiar. "Eben, is that really you?" I turned, startled, to find myself face to face with Jack Saunders, my childhood best friend and one-time ranch hand. He looked older, of course, his dark hair threaded with early silver and his face weathered by years of hard work and harder living, but his eyes were still the same soft gray I remembered, and his smile still had a friendly note. I almost sounded happy. "Weird. I didn't know you were back in town. Just got in last night," he replied, clapping me on the shoulder with a calloused hand. "Visiting Wendy's family for the holidays, you know how it is." I nodded, though, of course, I didn't know, not really. My own family had dwindled to just Marley and me, and even that relationship had been strained to the breaking point by years of grief and resentment. A young boy ran up and wrapped himself around Jack's leg. Jack patted his head affectionately. "This belonged to you." I pointed at the boy, who ducked deeper behind Jack's leg. Jack chuckled. "My oldest, Jeremy." I stared at his big gray eyes. If Emily and I had a child, he'd be this age. The revelation sat heavily on my chest. I tore my eyes away from his face, a reminder of what could have been. "It's good to see you," I said, and was surprised to find that I meant it. "How have you been?" "Really?" Jack shrugged, his smile turning rueful. "Oh, you know, getting by. It's been a tough few years, but I'm still kicking." I remembered then how hard Jack's home life had been when we were kids, how my parents had practically taken him in as one of their own. He'd always had a place at Thunder Basin Ranch, always known that he was welcome and wanted there. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was. "If there's anything I can do." Jack waved off my offer with a shake of his head. "But listen, I've been meaning to thank you and Marley for everything your folks did for me back then. I don't know where I would have ended up if it hadn't been for them." I felt a lump form in my throat at the mention of my parents' good deeds, and I swallowed hard against the sudden sting of tears. I hadn't allowed these emotions time or space in my life, and they nearly choked me. "They loved you like a son," I managed to say. "You were always family to them." Jack's eyes softened, and he opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, the bell above the door jingled again, heralding a new arrival. I glanced over Jack's shoulder, more out of habit than curiosity, and felt my heart stutter to a stop in my chest. Emily Wilson stood in the doorway, her blonde hair dusted with snowflakes and her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She was bundled up in a puffy winter coat and a knitted scarf, but even so, I could see that she was as beautiful as ever, perhaps even more so, with a grace and poise that spoke of hard-earned wisdom and strength. For a moment, I wondered if I had somehow conjured her up by the sheer force of my longing, or if the ache in my chest that had never quite faded had finally grown powerful enough to manifest her in the flesh. She turned her head and caught sight of us, and the polite smile that curved her lips was too real, too familiar, to be anything but genuine. "Jack," she said, her voice warm with affection as she approached us. "I thought that was you. It's so good to see you." She embraced him quickly, the easy intimacy of the gesture making something twist painfully in my gut. Then she turned to me, her smile freezing slightly as she took in my blank expression. Ebenezer," she said, and the sound of my name on her tongue was like an icicle to the heart. "Merry Christmas." "Emily," I replied, my voice sounding strangled and distant to my own ears. "I didn't expect to see you here." The truth was, I didn't expect to see her anywhere. Somehow we managed to avoid each other in this small town. Her smile faltered, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been hurt or confusion cross her face before she smoothed it away. "I just stopped in to drop off the toy donations we've collected," she said. Of course she did. Emily had always been the type to throw herself into the spirit of the season, to give of herself so freely and easily that it made my own reserve seem all the more stark in comparison. I nodded, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here, trapped between the two people who knew me best and yet understood me least. "Well, I won't keep you," I said, my tone brusque. "I need to be getting back to the ranch anyway." Emily opened her mouth as if to protest, but I was already turning away, mumbling a hasty goodbye to Jack and heading for the register with my feet in tow. I could feel their eyes on my back as I paid and gathered my purchases, but I didn't dare look back, didn't trust myself not to crumble under their combined scrutiny. It wasn't until I was back in my truck, the engine rumbling to life beneath me, that I allowed myself to breathe again. I dropped my head back, my eyes squeezed shut as I tried to calm the rapid beating of my heart. Seeing Emily had shaken me more than I cared to admit, had stirred up all the old feelings of love and longing and loss that I had worked so hard to bury. I thought of all the times she had reached out to me after my parents died, all the ways she had tried to coax me out of my grief and back into the land of the living. And I had pushed her away at every turn, too mired in my own pain to see the love and concern in her eyes. As I drove back to the ranch, the snow swirling in lazy eddies around me, my mind drifted back to those early days after my mother's death, when the house had seemed so empty and cold without her gentle presence. My father had retreated into his own sorrow, spending long days out on the range or holed up in his study with a bottle of whiskey, and Marley and I had been left to fend for ourselves, two lost souls adrift in a sea of grief. The ranch begun to fall into disrepair, the fences sagging and the barns leaking, the animals and people growing thin and listless without my mother's loving care. Emily had tried to help, showing up day after day with casseroles and kind words, her eyes always so soft and sad when she looked at me. I'd been too proud to accept her pity, too stubborn to let her see how much I was hurting. So I had lashed out at her instead, my words sharp and cutting, designed to drive her away. I told myself it was for the best, that she deserved someone whole and undamaged, someone who could give her the love and attention she needed. It wasn't until much later, after my father had followed my mother to the grave and Marley and I fought like crows, that I realized how wrong I had been. How much I had lost by pushing away the one person who had only ever wanted to help me heal. But by then, it was too late. Emily had moved on to do her residency, and I was left alone with my regrets, the bitter taste of my own foolishness like ashes in my mouth. As I pulled up to the Cratchit house, the weight of the past hanging like heavy chains on my shoulders, I couldn't help but wonder what might have been different if I had let Emily in all those years ago, if I had allowed myself to lean on her strength instead of pushing her away. And as I sat there, surrounded by the vastness of the Wyoming sky, I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope stir to life in my chest. I glanced at the sacks of chicken feed I'd put on the bench seat. They leaned against the door as if they wanted to be far away from me. I had a ranch to run and a future to build, and that meant putting aside my own selfish desires and focusing on the task at hand. With a sigh, I pushed open the door. There would be time enough for soul-searching later. For now, I had work to do. Chapter 6. As told by Eben. The Cratchit home was as small a house as you could fit two people inside. The blue-painted structure stood out against the stark, snow-covered landscape, a thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney and dissipating into the gray December sky. Grumbling under my breath, I went around to the passenger side and grabbed the sack of chicken feed, my boots barely getting hold on the ice. The cold wind bit at my exposed skin, testifying that a storm was on the way. I hunched my shoulders against it, huffing out a cloud of frosted breath. I would, quite begrudgingly, put the plow on as soon as I got back to the barn. I hated being told what to do. I couldn't believe I was wasting my time playing delivery boy for Bob Cratchit. There were a million things that needed doing back at the ranch to get ready for a storm, and here I was, trudging through the snow to drop off a bag of feed that Bob should have had the foresight to pick up himself. As I approached the front door, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I glanced towards the window, and my step faltered, my breath catching in my throat. Through the glass, I could see Martha Cratchit sitting on the threadbare sofa, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her face was buried in her hands, but I could still make out the anguish etched into her features, the way her fingers trembled as she rubbed them over her swollen belly. I wasn't used to seeing such raw displays of emotion, especially not from someone I barely knew. For a moment, I just stood there, the sacks of feed heavy in my arms, unsure whether to proceed with my original plan to knock and drop them inside or simply leave the bag on the porch and beat a hasty retreat. It would be easier, I thought, to just drop the feed and go, to pretend I hadn't seen her cry. But something held me back, some strange, nagging sense of responsibility that I couldn't quite shake. Bob was my employee, after all, and by extension his family's well-being was somehow tied to my own. I was just about to take a step forward, to force myself to knock on that door and face whatever awaited me on the other side, when the shrill ring of my cell phone shattered the silence. Startled, I dropped both sacks on the porch and fumbled in my pocket for the device. I glanced at the screen, my brow furrowing when I saw the name flashing there. Fred, Marley's son. The one person in the world I could usually count on to leave me well enough alone. I jabbed at the answer button, lifting the phone to my ear with a scowl. "What do you want, Fred?" I snapped, not bothering with any pretense of a greeting. "Uncle Eben." Fred's voice was as bright and chipper as ever, completely unfazed by my gruff tone. "Merry Christmas. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "You're always catching me at a bad time," I grumbled, shifting back to my warm truck. "What is it? I'm in the middle of something." "Oh well, I won't keep you long then," Fred said, his words rushing out in an excited tumble. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm here at the ranch house. I brought you a little Christmas present, thought I'd spread some holiday cheer and maybe catch up with my favorite uncle while I'm at it." I felt my blood pressure skyrocket, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles turned white. "You're where?" I demanded, my voice rising in disbelief. "The ranch house," Fred repeated, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for him to show up uninvited on my doorstep. I let myself in with the spare key. "I hope you don't mind." "Of course I mind." I snapped, my temper flaring hot and bright in my chest. "What the heck do you think you're doing, Fred? You can't just barge into my house whenever you feel like it." "I'm not barging," Fred said, sounding a bit defensive now. "I brought you a gift and I wanted to spend some time with you. It's Christmas." I scoffed, my lip curling in disdain. "And since when have you ever known me to give a darn about Christmas? If you're looking for some kind of heartwarming family reunion, you've come to the wrong place." This had to be Marley's influence. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a heavy silence that stretched on for a beat too long. "Uncle Eben," Fred said finally, his voice softer now, almost pleading, "I know things haven't been easy between us, but you're my family. I care about you, and I just want to make sure you're not alone on the holidays." I felt a spark of warmth in my chest that I quickly stamped out. I didn't need Fred's pity or his misguided attempts at familial bonding. Even as I tried to fortify the familiar shield of bitterness and resentment, I couldn't quite shake the image of Martha Cratchit's tear-streaked face from my mind. The memory of her anguish, so raw and visceral, hovered at the edges of my consciousness, a silent reproach to my own stubborn isolation. I shook my head, trying to clear it of the unwanted thoughts. I didn't have time for this, for Fred's intrusion, or Martha's tears, or the strange, unsettling feelings they both stirred up inside me. "Listen, Fred," I said, my tone clipped and businesslike. "I need you to stay put until I get back to the house, you hear me? Don't touch anything, don't go poking around in my affairs. Just sit tight and wait for me." "But Uncle Eben," Fred began, but I cut him off with a sharp bark of laughter. "Don't but Uncle Eben me," I said, my voice hardening with suspicion. "I know you, Fred. You're always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, always trying to meddle in my business. Well, not this time. You stay out of my things and out of my way, or so help me. Okay, Okay, Fred said quickly, holding up his hands in surrender. Even though I couldn't see him, I knew the gesture well. I'll wait for you. I promise. Just hurry back, all right? It's cold in here. I gritted my teeth, biting back the sharp retort that sprang to my lips. Of course, it was cold in the house. I kept the thermostat turned down to save on heating costs, a fact that Fred would know if he ever bothered to take an interest in the realities of running a ranch. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I grunted out a terse acknowledgement and ended the call, shoving the phone back into my pocket with a little more force than necessary. For a moment, the weight of my own frustration and annoyance pressed down on me, a familiar, leaden feeling of being pulled in too many directions at once. Beneath that was a sense of unease, a prickling awareness that something was shifting inside me, some long-buried part of myself stirring to life after years of dormancy. I didn't like it, didn't trust it. Change was a dangerous thing, a disruption to the careful order I imposed on my life. And yet, as much as I tried to resist it, I couldn't shake the feeling that change was coming for me whether I wanted it or not. With a muttered curse, my eyes automatically sought the window where I had seen Martha crying just moments before. The room beyond the glass was empty now, the sofa vacant. Whatever private drama had been playing out in that space had passed, leaving no trace of its presence behind. I turned away, my jaw clenched tight as I trudged back to my truck. I had wasted enough time here already, enough time dwelling on things that were none of my concern. Bob Cratchit's wife and her troubles were not my responsibility, no matter how much the sight of her tears had unsettled me. And Fred, well, Fred was just going to have to learn to respect boundaries, to understand that I wasn't the kind of man who welcomed uninvited guests or unexpected gifts. I had my own way of doing things, and I wasn't about to let anyone, family or not, disrupt that. As I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition, I felt a grim sense of determination settle over me. I would deal with Fred and his misguided attempts at holiday cheer, and then I would get back to work, back to the familiar routine of the ranch and all its endless demands. As I pulled away from the Cratchit house, the image of Martha's anguished face lingered in my mind, a silent, haunting reminder of the pain and sorrow that lurk just beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. I couldn't help but wonder if that small, almost invisible crack in my armor might be the beginning of something much larger, much more profound. Chapter 7. As Told by Eben. The ranch house loomed before me as I pulled up the gravel drive, the weathered wood siding and tin roof a familiar sight. The sun hung low in the winter sky, casting long shadows across the frozen ground and bathing everything in a cold, ethereal light. I parked my truck and climbed out. My mind was too consumed with thoughts of Fred and the unwelcome intrusion he represented to notice the cold on my bare fingers. I caught sight of my nephew sitting on the old wooden porch swing, his lanky frame bundled up in a puffy winter coat and a bright red scarf. He looked up as I approached, his face breaking into a wide, dimpled grin that made him look far younger than his 20 years. "Uncle Eben," he exclaimed, leaping to his feet and closing the distance between us in a few long strides. Before I could react, he'd thrown his arms around me in a bone-crushing hug, the force of his embrace nearly knocking me off balance. I stiffened, my arms hanging awkwardly at my sides as I tried to process the unexpected physical contact. It had been years since anyone had hugged me. Fred, sensing my discomfort, he pulled back after a moment, his grin turning mischievous. "It doesn't count until you hug me back, you know." His hazel eyes sparkling with amusement. "I can't let go until you finish this." I cleared my throat, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I wasn't used to being caught off guard, and Fred's easy affection had thrown me for a loop. Awkwardly, I reached out and gave him a single, perfunctory pat on the back, my hand feeling stiff and clumsy against the slick fabric of his coat. Fred threw his head back and laughed, the sound ringing out across the empty yard like a bell. "Close enough," he said, still chuckling as he stepped back and shoved his hands into his pockets. "Merry Christmas, Uncle Eben. It's good to see you." I grunted in response, my eyes narrowing as I took in his appearance. Fred had always been a bit of a mystery to me, with his easy smiles and boundless optimism. He was so different from Marley and me, with our guarded hearts and cynical outlooks. It was hard for me to understand how someone could go through life with such an unshakable sense of joy and positivity. It had been his gift since he arrived on the planet. I wish I could say the same, I said gruffly, crossing my arms over my chest. What are you doing here, Fred? I thought I made it clear that I don't appreciate uninvited guests. Fred's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a crisp white envelope. I come bearing gifts, he said, holding the envelope out to me with a flourish, or at least an invitation. I eyed the envelope suspiciously, making no move to take it. An invitation to what exactly? To our annual family Christmas dinner, Fred replied, his tone turning more serious. Mom, Dad and I would love to have you join us this year, Uncle Eben. It's been too long since we've all been together. I scoffed, the sound harsh and grating to my ears. I'm too busy for that nonsense, I said, turning away from him and heading towards the front door. I don't have time for unnecessary gatherings and small talk. Fred dogged my steps. Christmas isn't unnecessary, Uncle Eben, he said softly, his voice taking on a note of sadness that made something twist uncomfortably in my chest. It's a time for family, for coming together and celebrating the love we have for each other. Life is too short to spend it all alone, working yourself to the bone. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, my jaw clenching as his words sank in. Unbidden, the image of Marley lying in a hospital bed, her life hanging in the balance, flashed through my mind. I hadn't been there for her. She'd almost died, and I wasn't there. The thought was harsh and unforgiving. I shook my head, trying to clear it of the unwanted thoughts. I couldn't afford to let myself be swayed by sentiment. I appreciate the invitation, I said stiffly, not turning around, but my answer is no. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I started to open the door, but Fred's hand on my arm stopped me. I looked down at his fingers, curled around the sleeve of my coat, and irritation sparked to life in my gut. Uncle Eben, wait, he said, his voice urgent. There's something else I need to tell you. It's about Mom. I stiffened. Slowly, I turned to face him, my eyes searching his face for any hint of what was to come. What about her? I asked, my voice sounding strained and distant to my own ears. Fred scuffed his boot against the porch boards, his expression turning somber. During her episode, he said quietly, the doctors had to replace one of her heart valves. They used a pig valve, which is supposed to last about 8 years. I felt the blood drain from my face, my stomach churning with a sudden, sickening sense of dread. 8 years. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Fred nodded, his eyes shadowed with worry. The surgery was really hard on her, Uncle Eben. The doctor said there's a chance she might not want to go through it again when the time comes. I took a step back, my hand falling away from the doorknob as if it had burned me. The implications of Fred's words crashed over me like a tidal wave, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my head spin. Marley, my big sister, the only family I had left in this world, faced a death sentence, and I had been too caught up in my own bitterness and resentment to even know about it. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, my voice rough with emotion. Why didn't anyone tell me? Fred sighed, running a hand through his tousled hair. She didn't want to worry you, he said softly. She knows how much the ranch means to you, how hard you work to keep it running. She didn't want to add to your burdens. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh, the sound scraping against my throat like broken glass. And you think keeping this from me was the answer? You think I wouldn't want to know that my own sister might be? I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Fred stepped closer, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder in a gesture of comfort. I think, he said gently, that Mom would be more likely to fight for her life if she knew she had your support. If she knew that you were there for her no matter what. I shook my head, my eyes stinging. I don't know how to do that, I said hoarsely, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be the kind of brother she needs. Fred smiled, his expression filled with a warmth and compassion that made my chest ache. You start by showing up, he said simply, by being there for her even when it's hard, by letting go of the past and focusing on the time you have left together. I swallowed hard, my throat constricting with a grief I had never allowed myself to feel. The thought of losing Marley, of facing a world without her steady presence and unwavering love, was almost too much to bear. As the pain threatened to overwhelm me, I felt a flicker of something else stirring to life in my chest. A sense of purpose, of determination, a realization that I had been given a second chance, an opportunity to make things right before it was too late. "I don't know if I can do it," I said hoarsely, my voice cracking with emotion. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Fred's hand tightened on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You are," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "You are the strongest man I know, Uncle Eben." I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me like a balm. For so long, I had pushed everyone away, convinced that I was better off on my own. That love and connection were weaknesses I couldn't afford. I wasn't sure how to let go of that, or if I should. Wasn't I safer back here? Fred reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I almost forgot," he said, handing it to me with a grin. "I brought you a little something. Merry Christmas, Uncle Eben." Slowly, carefully, I peeled back the wrapping paper, my fingers trembling slightly as I revealed a simple wooden frame. Inside, nestled behind a pane of glass, was an old photograph, faded and slightly creased at the edges. I recognized it instantly, the memory hitting me like a punch to the gut. It was a picture of me and Marley taken when we were just kids, standing in front of this very ranch house with our parents. We were all smiling, our faces bright with laughter and love, our arms wrapped around each other in a tight embrace. I stared at the picture for a long moment. It was a reminder of a time when things had been simpler, when our family had been whole and happy, before the losses and the heartbreaks that had torn us apart. "I found it while I was going through some old boxes," Fred said softly, his voice gentle and understanding. "I thought you might like to have it, to remember the love that once held our family together." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I clutched the picture to my chest, the smooth wood of the frame cool against my skin. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice rough and unsteady. Fred smiled. "I love you, Uncle Eben," he said simply, his words ringing with sincerity. "When I have kids, I want them to know their great uncle." With that, he turned and headed down the porch steps. I watched him go, the picture still clutched tightly in my hands, a tangible reminder of the love and connection I had been denying for so long. As Fred's truck disappeared down the road, I looked down at the photograph once more, tracing my finger over the smiling faces of my parents and sister. "I love you too, Fred," I whispered to the empty air, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar on my tongue. I glanced over Fred's invitation. The photograph in my hands seemed to pulse with a silent message, a reminder of the power of love and the importance of family, even in the face of old wounds and bitter grudges. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and headed inside. The picture clutched to my chest like a talisman. Maybe it was time to try to love again. There had to be something small that I could do. Where would Mom want me? The answer was accompanied by a clap of thunder that lifted the hair on my arms. Church. Mom would want me in church today. I glanced at the ceiling. "The roof might cave in," I said out loud. "And I'd better put on that plow," I mumbled.
Chapter 8. As told by Emily. The small white clapboard church stood before me, its steeple reaching towards the clear, cold Wyoming sky like a steadfast guardian of faith. I couldn't help but admire the simple green wreaths adorning the windows and the single large red bow on the front door. The decorations were a testament to the church's role in the traditions of our small ranching town. I'd come to this building more times than I could count, and I loved it here. I pulled my coat tighter around me as the first few snowflakes began to fall, the icy crystals kissing my cheeks and catching in my eyelashes. There was something magical about the arrival of fresh snow, the way it blanketed the world in a hushed stillness and made everything feel new and full of possibility. A familiar voice called out to me. "Emily, you made it." I turned to see Mrs. Johnson, one of the church's most devoted members, hurrying towards me with a warm smile on her face. Her gray hair was tucked neatly beneath a knitted hat she's probably made herself, and her eyes sparkled with genuine affection as she reached out to clasp my gloved hands on her own. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Mrs. Johnson," I replied, returning her smile with one of my own. "Christmas Eve service is one of my favorite traditions." Mrs. Johnson nodded, her expression turning slightly concerned. I heard there's a big snowstorm coming in later tonight, so be sure to stay safe on your way to the hospital. I felt a rush of warmth at her words, touched by her thoughtfulness. I will, I promise. Thank you for looking out for me. With a final squeeze of my hands, Mrs. Johnson released me and headed into the church. I stepped into the warm glow of candlelight and the soft murmur of conversation among the congregation. The scent of beeswax and pine filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of hot cocoa and cinnamon from the fellowship hall next door. As I made my way down the aisle, I took a moment to appreciate the rustic charm of the wooden pews and the handmade nativity scene displayed at the front of the church. The figures were simple and slightly worn, but there was something deeply comforting about their presence, a reminder of the enduring power of faith in hard and humble circumstances. My gaze swept over the gathering worshippers, searching for a familiar face. When I spotted Marley and her husband John sitting near the back, I felt a rush of relief. It had been far too long since I'd seen my old friends, and the prospect of catching up with them filled me with purpose. I slipped into the pew beside Marley, who turned to me with a smile that lit up her whole face. "Emily," she exclaimed softly, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so happy you're here." I returned her embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume and feeling the tension in my shoulders ease. "Me too," I whispered, holding her close for a long moment before pulling back to greet John with a friendly handshake. Marley's heart condition scared me. I'd visited her often in the hospital and heard her amazing story of seeing into heaven. What a beautiful soul. As I settled into my seat, I couldn't help but glance around the church once more, my eyes searching for a glimpse of a tall, broad-shouldered figure with piercing blue eyes and a perpetual scowl. Even though I knew it was unlikely, a part of me still hoped to see Eben walk through those doors, his presence filling the room with the electric energy that had always crackled between us. He wasn't there, and I felt a familiar ache settle in my chest. Marley, ever attuned, leaned in close and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Eben isn't coming," she said softly, her voice full of understanding and sympathy. I laughed ruefully, shaking my head. "You'd think after all these years I'd stop looking for him." Marley smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "We don't stop caring about people that easily," she said, giving my arm a comforting squeeze. "Especially not the ones who've left a mark on our hearts." I swallowed hard. Marley's words hit close to home. No matter how much time passed or how far apart we grew, a part of me would always belong to Ebenezer Scrooge and would always yearn for the love we once shared. Before I could dwell on that thought for too long, the service began. The opening notes of A Joy to the World filled the air. I allowed myself to be swept up in the music and the message, letting the words about Jesus wash over me like a balm. As the pastor spoke of the importance of forgiveness and compassion, of the transformative power of the Christmas spirit, I thought of my own journey, of the choices I'd made and the love I'd lost. I thought of Scrooge, of the bitter, lonely man he'd become, so different from the passionate, caring boy I'd fallen for all those years ago. And I thought of the hope that still flickered within me, the belief that even the most hardened hearts could be softened by the power of love and grace. As the service drew to a close, I bowed my head in silent prayer, asking for the strength to move forward and the wisdom to find happiness in the present, even as a part of my heart still clung to the past. When the final notes of the closing hymn faded away, I turned to Marley and John, feeling a sudden rush of gratitude for their presence in my life. "Thank you for being here," I said softly, reaching out to clasp their hands in my own. "It means more to me than you know." Marley smiled. "We wouldn't be anywhere else," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Mom and Dad loved the Christmas Eve message." We lingered in the church for a while longer, catching up on each other's lives. As we talked and laughed, I felt a sense of belonging and connection. It was just what I needed this Christmas. With a final hug and promises to stay in touch, I bid farewell to Marley and John and stepped out into the snow-covered landscape, the church bells ringing overhead like angels bursting into song.
Chapter 9. As told by Eben, I sat in my parked truck across the street from the small church, watching as the congregation filed out into the growing snowstorm. The flakes swirled around them like a living thing, driven by the biting wind that howled through the barren trees and rattled the windows of my old Ford. I grumbled under my breath, questioning for the 100th time what had possessed me to come here in the first place. It wasn't like I had any business attending a Christmas Eve service, not after all these years of avoiding anything to do with the holiday. even as I tried to convince myself to turn the key and drive away, I couldn't shake the memory of the photograph Fred had given me, the one that had stirred up long-buried recollections of attending services with my parents when I was just a boy. The warmth and love that had filled those moments, the sense of belonging and connection, had been so different from the cold emptiness of my current existence. The service ended, and the congregation began to spill out of the doors like candy from a stocking. My gaze was drawn to a familiar pair of figures walking hand in hand like newlyweds. Marley and John are still so obviously in love after all these years. I scoffed at their display of affection in an effort to ignore the small, traitorous part of me that envied them. They longed for the kind of connection and intimacy they shared, the sense of being truly seen and understood by another person. My attention was diverted by a flash of golden hair, and I felt my breath catch in my throat as Emily appeared. She was alone, her head bowed against the wind, but even from a distance I could see her grace and beauty. She had always been stunning, even when we were just teenagers stealing kisses behind the barn. But now, with the wisdom and maturity of years etched into her features, she was breathtaking in a way that made my chest ache with longing for her. I watched as she stopped to chat with a young couple, their arms full of squirming toddlers and a baby bump visible beneath the woman's coat. Emily's face lit up as she interacted with them, her laughter carrying across the snowy street like a bell. The easy joy and warmth of their exchange laid my own isolation and disconnection stark and bare. As I sat there, lost in my dark thoughts, a voice suddenly called out from the sidewalk beside my truck. "Hey, Scrooge. I see you've got that snowplow attachment for your truck. Too bad you're too cheap to actually use it." I jerked my head around to see one of the churchgoers grinning at me through the passenger window, his face ruddy from the cold. He let out a bark of laughter and continued on his way, leaving me feeling even more self-conscious and exposed than before. My face burned with shame and anger, my hands clenching on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Was that really how everyone saw me? As a miserly old man who hoarded tools and equipment but refused to put them to good use? I tried to tell myself that I didn't care what they thought, that their opinions didn't matter. But even as I repeated the words in my head, I couldn't make myself believe them. When had I become this person, so far removed from the man who had dreamed of building a life and a family, of leaving a legacy that would endure long after I was gone? Emily's gaze caught mine from across the street. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the rest of the world fading away until there was nothing but the two of us locked in a silent exchange. And then, to my utter shock and amazement, she raised her hand in a small, tentative wave. It was such a simple gesture, so easy to miss or misinterpret. But in that moment, it felt like a lifeline, a connection to a world I had long since given up on. Without thinking, I raised my hand in response, the movement awkward. Emily smiled, and triumph filled my chest. I'd done that. I'd made her smile. It was only a moment, a fleeting instant of connection in a sea of isolation and regret. But as I pulled out of the parking lot and headed back towards the ranch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The snowstorm was intensifying now, the flakes coming down so thick and fast that I could barely see the road in front of me. I flipped on the wipers and leaned forward, squinting into the swirling whiteness as I navigated the twists and turns. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in the cup holder beside me, startling me out of my concentration. I grabbed it with one hand, glancing down at the screen to see Bob Cratchit's name flashing up at me. I let out a grunt of annoyance and hit the answer button, holding the phone to my ear with my shoulder as I continued to drive. "What is it, Bob?" There was a moment of hesitation on the other end of the line, and then Bob's voice came through, tentative and unsure. "Mr. Scrooge, I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve, but I was wondering, well, I was hoping I might be able to take the day off tomorrow to spend with Martha." I felt a flare of irritation at the request, my mind immediately jumping to all the work that needed to be done around the ranch. With the harsh Wyoming winter bearing down on us, there were 1,000 tasks that couldn't be put off or delayed. I opened my mouth to deliver a brusque refusal when the image of Martha's tear-streaked face flashed through my mind. The way she had looked so small and fragile curled up on that couch, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly. I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. I couldn't quite explain it, but something about that moment had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't shake. The raw vulnerability of it, the reminder of the frailty and preciousness of life. Fine, I said at last, the word feeling like it was being dragged out of me. Take the day. But I expect you back at work first thing on the 26th, you hear me? There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then Bob's voice came through, choked with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Scrooge. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to us. I grunted in response, unsure how to handle the genuine gratitude in his tone. It made me uncomfortable, this sudden outpouring of feeling from a man I had always kept at a careful distance. Don't mention it, I mumbled. And don't make me regret it. I hung up before he could respond, tossing the phone back into the cup holder with a sigh. What was wrong with me? My mind drifted to Marley and her half of the ranch. I wondered if she had a snowplow attachment for her truck. I hoped she did, that she was safe and warm, protected from the worst of the weather. It was a strange feeling, this sudden flicker of concern for a woman I had spent so long resenting and avoiding. As I pulled up to the ranch house, the snow swirling around me in a blinding whirl of white, a sudden wave of exhaustion washed over me. It was as if all the years of isolation and loneliness, all the weight of my own choices and regrets had finally caught up to me in that moment. I stumbled inside, shaking the snow from my coat and stomping my boots on the worn welcome mat. The house was dark and silent. The only sound was the soft pop and hiss of the wood stove in the corner. I flipped on the lights and made my way to the kitchen, my movements mechanical and rote. It was only as I stood there, staring into the depths of my empty fridge, that the full weight of my solitude hit me like a physical blow. There was no one waiting for me, no warm meal or loving embrace to come home to. Just the cold, stark emptiness of a life lived in service to nothing but my own bitterness and greed. I closed the fridge with a heavy sigh, my appetite suddenly gone. Instead, I reached for the can of soup I had left on the counter 2 days ago, popping the top and dumping it into a pot on the stove. As I stirred the thin, watery broth, I couldn't help but think of the scene I had witnessed at the church. The warmth and connection, the sense of belonging and purpose that radiated from every face. It was a world I had once been a part of, a life I had known and loved. But somewhere along the path, I had lost my way. I had let my own pain and anger consume me until there was nothing left but the bitter shell of the man I had once been. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring into the depths of my soup bowl as if it held the answers to all of life's questions. All that reflected back at me was my own face, lined and haggard with the weight of too many years spent alone. I thought of Emily, of the brief moment of connection we had shared across the snowy street. The way her smile had lit up her face, the warmth and kindness I found there. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. If she could still glimpse the man I had once been, the one who had loved her with passion and intensity. Or if all she saw now was the bitter, broken shell of a man, too far gone to ever find his way back to the light. I pushed the soup away. The silence of the house pressed in on me from all sides, amplifying the emptiness and despair that had taken root in my very bones. I couldn't go on like this. The life I'd built for myself, the one I had once been so proud of, was nothing but a hollow facade, a mask I had worn for so long that I had forgotten what lay beneath. As I sat there in the quiet of my cabin, the snow falling outside and the warmth of Emily's smile still lingering in my mind, I knew that I was ready to take another step.
Chapter 10. As told by Bob. The old truck shuddered and groaned as I pushed it through the swirling snowstorm, the headlights barely cutting through the darkness ahead. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly, the worn leather creaking beneath my fingers as I fought to keep the vehicle on the road. The storm had come out of nowhere, the flakes falling so thick and fast that it felt like driving through a wall of white. The wipers struggled to keep up, the blades scraping across the windshield with a grating rhythm that set my teeth on edge. My mind raced with worry. I thought of Martha, alone at home and heavy with child, and my heart clenched with a mixture of love and fear. I needed to be there for her, to hold her hand and tell her everything would be all right, even if I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the warm glow of our little house appeared through the swirling snow. I felt a rush of relief as I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching on the freshly fallen powder. I hurried to the front door, my boots slipping on the icy steps as I fumbled with the keys. The wind howled around me, the cold biting at my exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The chicken feed was there. I rolled my eyes even as I hoped it hadn't been spoiled. As I pushed open the door, the warmth of the house enveloped me like a blanket, the scent of cinnamon and pine filling my nostrils. But the relief was short-lived as I caught sight of Martha hunched over on the kitchen floor, her face contorted in pain. "Martha!" I crushed to her side. My heart pounded in my chest as I knelt beside her, my hands hovering helplessly over her trembling form. She looked up at me, her brown eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Bob," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think something's wrong." I tried to lift her, to help her to her feet, but she cried out in agony at the slightest movement. I froze, watching helplessly as she took a few deep breaths, her hands clutching at her swollen belly. After a moment, the pain seemed to subside, and she nodded weakly, indicating that she was ready to move. I gently helped her to the couch, arranging the pillows behind her back and draping a soft blanket over her legs. "What happened, love?" I asked, my voice rough with worry. "How long have you been like this?" Martha shook her head, her dark curls damp with sweat. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just starting to make dinner when this terrible pain hit me. It felt like my whole body was on fire." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic in my chest. "I'll finish up in the kitchen," I said, forcing a smile. You just rest here, okay? I'll be right back." I hurried to the stove, my hands shaking as I stirred the pot of soup Martha had started. The rich aroma of chicken and vegetables filled the air, but I barely noticed, my mind consumed with worry for my wife and unborn child. Suddenly, a shout of pain tore through the house and I dropped the spoon with a clatter. I raced back to the living room, my heart in my throat. Martha gasped for breath, her face pale and her body trembling. "Bob," she managed through gritted teeth, "I think they're contractions." My mind reeled as the realization hit me. My wife was in labor 2 months early, and we were caught in the middle of the worst snowstorm in years. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands, dialing Dr. Wilson's office with a desperate urgency. The call went unanswered. The office was likely closed due to the holiday. Undeterred, I tried the hospital, my heart pounding as I waited for someone to pick me up. Finally, a nurse answered, her voice calm and professional. "My wife is in labor," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other in my haste. "We're stuck at home in the middle of the storm. It's too early." "What do I do?" The nurse asked a few quick questions about Martha's condition, her tone reassuring even as she delivered the news I had been dreading. "Under normal circumstances, I would advise you to bring her in immediately," she said. "But with the storm warning in effect and the plows not running, it's too dangerous to attempt travel." I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me, my breath catching in my throat. "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The nurse's voice was gentle but firm. "Keep her lying down and as still as possible," she instructed. "The goal is to slow or stop the contractions if we can. Call back in an hour with an update on her condition, and we'll go from there." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and hung up the phone with a heavy heart. I turned back to Martha, who was watching me with wide, frightened eyes. "It's going to be okay," I said, trying to inject some confidence into my voice. "The hospital said to keep you lying down and still, and to call back in an hour." Martha nodded, her face pale but determined. "I trust you, Bob," she said softly, reaching out to take my hand. "We'll get through this together." I squeezed her fingers, feeling a rush of love and gratitude for this incredible woman who had chosen to share her life with me. "I won't leave your side," I promised, settling onto the couch beside her. As the minutes ticked by, I watched Martha closely, my heart clenching every time a contraction hit and her face contorted in pain. I used my phone to time the space between them. They seemed to hold steady, and I took little solace in the fact that they weren't getting closer together. I held her hand, murmuring words of comfort and encouragement, even as my own fear threatened to overwhelm me. The storm raged on outside, the wind howling like a wounded animal as the snow piled higher and higher against the windows. Inside, in the warmth and safety of our little home, I focused all my attention on the woman I loved, determined to do whatever it took to keep her and our baby safe. I thought of all the dreams we had shared, all the plans we had made for our growing family. The little room we had painted in soft shades of yellow and green, the tiny clothes folded neatly in the dresser drawers. I thought of the joy on Martha's face when she had first felt the baby kick, the wonder in her eyes as she marveled at the miracle growing inside her. And I thought of the love that had brought us to this moment, the love that had sustained us through all the challenges and hardships of our life together. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for the long, uncertain hours ahead, my heart full of hope and determination. "I love you, Martha," I whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And I love our little one, too. We're going to be okay, I promise." And in that moment, despite the fear and the uncertainty, I believed it with all my heart.
Chapter 11. As told by Emily. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, and I stepped into the warmth of the hospital lobby, brushing the snow from my coat and boots. The flakes had been falling steadily since I left the church, blanketing the world in a hushed, white stillness. I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of antiseptic and lemon-scented cleaner filling my nostrils as I mentally prepared myself for the long shift ahead. Christmas Eve was not usually a busy time in the maternity ward. As I made my way towards the nurse's station, I caught sight of the head nurse, Marge, her kind face creased with a welcoming smile. "Dr. Wilson, so glad you made it safely," she said, her voice warm and maternal. "We've had a few deliveries and everyone is doing just fine." I returned her smile, feeling a rush of affection for this woman who had been a mentor and friend since my first day on the job. "That's wonderful news, Marge," I said, shrugging out of my coat and hanging it on the nearby rack. "Can you give me an update on each of the mothers and babies?" Marge nodded, handing me a stack of charts and launching into a detailed report on each patient's condition. I listened attentively, jotting down notes and asking questions as needed, my mind already shifting into the focused, analytical mode that had served me so well in my career. As Marge neared the end of her update, her expression turned serious, and I felt a knot of unease begin to form in my stomach. "There's one more thing, Dr. Wilson," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "We received a call from Bob Cratchit a little while ago. His wife Martha is experiencing some concerning symptoms." I felt my heart skip a beat at the mention of the Cratchits. My conversation with Martha jumped to the forefront of my mind. "What kind of symptoms?" I asked, my voice tight with concern. Marge shook her head, her brow furrowed. "He didn't go into too much detail, but from what I could gather, she's having some pretty intense pain and possibly contractions." I told him to keep her lying down and to call back with an update. I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities and contingency plans. "I'll give him a call back and see if I can get more information," I said, reaching for the phone on the desk. "If Martha is in labor, we need to get her here as soon as possible." Marge gave me an understanding look, her hand coming to rest briefly on my arm. "Of course, Dr. Wilson. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." I smiled my thanks and stepped away from the desk, the phone pressed to my ear as I dialed the Cratchit's number with trembling fingers. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, and I felt my heart sink with each unanswered tone. Just as I was about to give up, the line clicked and Bob's voice came through, strained and thin with worry. "Dr. Wilson," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Thank God you called. Martha's in so much pain and the contractions are getting closer together and I don't know what to do and—" His voice broke off abruptly, and I heard a muffled moan of agony in the background, followed by Bob's frantic apologies. "I'm sorry, Dr. Wilson, she's having another one. They're coming so fast now and I'm scared. What if something happens to the baby?" I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady myself. I knew all too well the risks of a premature birth, especially one happening outside of a hospital setting. At just 32 weeks along, Martha's baby would be small and underdeveloped, with a higher chance of complications like respiratory distress and infection. Panicking would do no good for either the Cratchits or myself. I needed to remain calm and focused, to use every ounce of my training and expertise to guide this young family through the crisis they faced. Bob, listen to me carefully, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I need you to get Martha to the hospital as soon as possible. I know the storm is making travel difficult, but it's crucial that we monitor her and the baby closely. Can you do that for me? There was a moment of heavy silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of Martha's labored breathing and Bob's soft, soothing murmurs. Dr. Wilson, I don't think we can, he said at last, his voice choked with despair. The snow is coming down so hard, and my truck is already blocked in. I tried to dig it out, but it's no use. We're stuck here. I felt a cold dread settle in the pit of my stomach, a sense of helplessness that threatened to overwhelm me. I shoved it down, forcing myself to think clearly and logically. There had to be a way to get the Cratchits the help they needed, even in the midst of this storm. Okay, Bob, here's what we're going to do, I said, my mind racing ahead. I'm going to send an ambulance to your location. They'll have the equipment and expertise to safely transport Martha and the baby to the hospital. In the meantime, I need you to keep her as comfortable and still as possible. Can you do that for me? Why, yes, Bob said, his voice trembling but determined. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe. Good, I said, feeling a rush of admiration for this brave, devoted man. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, he whispered, his words thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. I could hear the relief in his voice, the gratitude and trust that shone through even over the crackling phone line. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. You're welcome, Bob. Now, let me just put you on hold for a moment while I contact dispatch and get that ambulance on its way. I pressed the hold button and dialed the emergency dispatch number with shaking fingers, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for someone to pick up. When the dispatcher finally came on the line, her voice was heavy with regret and apology. I'm sorry, Dr. Wilson, she said, her words slow and careful. But due to the severe weather conditions, all emergency services have been shut down. The roads are just too dangerous, and we can't risk getting our crew stuck or putting them in harm's way. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do until the storm lets up. I felt the blood drain from my face, my knees going weak with shock and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could I be so powerless to help the Cratchits in their time of need? A sudden memory flashed through my mind so vividly that I could only believe it had come from the Holy Spirit. I stood in the church parking lot and waved to Eben, who had a snowplow attachment on the front of his truck. I bit my lip, my heart racing with a wild, desperate hope. Eben was the Cratchits' only chance, the one person who might be able to brave the storm and get Martha to the hospital safely. But would he do it? Would he set aside his bitterness and resentment, his years of isolation and anger to help a family in need? I didn't know, but I had to try. For Martha, for the baby, for the happiness and future of the Cratchit family. With trembling hands, I dialed Eben's number, my breath catching in my throat as I listened to the ringing on the other end. Please, I thought, my eyes squeezing shut in silent prayer. Please, let him answer. Let him be the man I once knew, the one who had a heart big enough to love and to give. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity.
Chapter 12. As told by Eben. I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest as the shrill ring of my cell phone pierced the silence of the ranch house. Disoriented and grumpy, I blinked in the dim light, trying to remember falling asleep in my recliner and wondering what noise had pulled me from my slumber. The phone rang again, and I grumbled under my breath, irritation flaring hot in my gut. Who in tarnation would have the audacity to call so late on Christmas Eve? Didn't they know I had work to do, a ranch to run? Fumbling for the phone, I squinted at the caller ID, my heart lurching with sudden fear when I saw the hospital's number flashing on the screen. A cold dread washed over me, and for a moment, all I could think of was Marley. Had something happened to her? Was she sick or hurt or... I shook my head, trying to banish the dark thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me. With a shaking hand, I pressed the answer button and lifted the phone to my ear, bracing myself for the worst. Thank heaven you answered. I need your help. I frowned, the request catching me off guard. What is it? I asked, trying to keep the wariness from my voice. What's going on? Emily's words tumbled out in a rush, her voice tight with worry. It's Martha Cratchit. She's gone into labor and the snow is too heavy for Bob to get her to the hospital. I know you have a snowplow attachment for your truck. Can you clear a path for them and help them get here safely? I blinked, the request so unexpected that, for a moment, I couldn't form a response. Martha Cratchit in labor? On Christmas Eve in the middle of the worst snowstorm in years? How bad is it? I asked, my mind already racing with the logistics of the task. Is the baby in danger? Emily's voice was grave, her words heavy with the weight of her concern. It's bad, Ebenezer. She's only 32 weeks along, and the contractions are coming fast. We need to get her here as soon as possible, or... She trailed off, but I could hear the unspoken fear in her voice. The fear of losing both mother and child, of a tragedy that would shatter the Cratchit family beyond repair. I swallowed hard, my decision made in an instant. I'm on my way, I said, already rising from my chair and reaching for my coat. Tell Bob to be ready to go as soon as I get there. Thank you, Ebenezer, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. I grunted in response, words feeling strange and unfamiliar on my tongue. It had been a long time since anyone had thanked me for anything, and even longer since I'd felt the warm glow of satisfaction that came with doing something good. I hung up the phone and sprang into action, layering up in warm clothes as quickly as my fumbling fingers would allow. My mind raced as I pulled on my boots and gloves, the severity of the situation sinking in with each passing moment. Martha Cratchit, the sweet, gentle woman who had always been so kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. And her baby, innocent and helpless, its life hanging in the balance. The thought of losing either of them made my chest tighten with a fear I hadn't felt in years. I stepped outside, the fierce wind and snow slapping me in the face and nearly taking the air right from my lungs. The storm had intensified since I'd last looked out the window, the flakes swirling so thick and fast that I could barely see a foot in front of me. For a moment, I hesitated, the bitter cold seeping into my bones and making me shiver. What was I thinking, heading out into this maelstrom? I was no hero. I was just a bitter man with a heart of stone too set in my ways to change. What of Martha? Of the pain and fear she must be feeling? I steeled myself against the biting cold and made my way to my truck. The plow was already attached, the heavy blade gleaming in the dim light, and I felt a surge of gratitude that my pride hadn't gotten the better of me today, at least in that respect. I climbed into the cab and turned the key, the engine roaring to life with a defiant growl. The headlights cut through the swirling snow like a beacon, illuminating the treacherous path ahead. I lowered the plow and began to drive, the truck lurching and shuddering as it pushed through the heavy drifts. The progress was slow and arduous, the snow impeding my every move, and I cursed under my breath as the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. How much time had passed since Emily's call? How long did Martha have before it was too late? The question swirled a relentless torrent of fear and doubt. And then, to my surprise, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, something I had once scoffed at as a sign of weakness and foolishness. I began to pray. The words spilled from my lips like a river, a desperate plea for help and guidance in this time of crisis. I prayed for Martha and her baby, for their safety and well-being. I prayed for Bob, for the strength and courage to face whatever lay ahead. And I prayed for myself, for the wisdom and compassion to be the man I needed to be in this moment. As I prayed, I felt a warmth begin to spread through my chest, a light that chased away the darkness that had consumed me for so long. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my pain, my heartbreak, my loneliness. I begged for forgiveness, for the chance to make things right, to be the person I had once been, or maybe someone better because of what I'd learned. As the truck pushed through the snow and the prayers poured from my heart, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. A sense of purpose, of direction, of the possibility of a life that was more than just survival. I was ready to face whatever lay ahead, ready to be the man that Martha and Bob needed me to be, the man that Emily had once loved. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my jaw clenched with determination. I would get to the Cratchits' house. I would clear a path for them, help them get to the hospital safely. And I would do it not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because it was the right thing to do. The snow moved around me like a living thing, the wind howling like a wounded animal. But I pushed on, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my heart filled with a fierce, unshakable resolve. Hold on, Martha, I thought, my lips moving in a silent prayer. Hold on, little one. I'm coming. I'm on my way.
Chapter 13. As read by Bob. The living room was dark and quiet, save for the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights and the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The multicolored lights cast a warm, inviting ambiance, their gentle twinkling a stark contrast to the raging storm outside. The flames danced in the fireplace, their hypnotic movement and soothing sound providing a sense of comfort and security amidst the chaos. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, its mournful wails echoing through the night. The savage gusts rattled the windows, the glass panes shuddering under the onslaught of the icy gale. Flurries of snow swirled against the frosted glass, the delicate flakes driven by the relentless wind in a frenzied, ethereal dance. I sat beside Martha, my fingers intertwined with hers as she breathed through another painful contraction. Her grip tightened, her knuckles turning white as she rode out the wave. I had a constant pang of helplessness in my chest. I would have given anything to take this pain from her, to bear it myself and spare her the suffering. "You're doing great, love," I murmured, brushing a damp curl from her forehead with my free hand. "Just keep breathing, nice and slow." Martha nodded, her face pale and drawn in the dim light of the living room. The shrill ring of the phone made me jump, and I reluctantly released Martha's hand to answer it. "Hello?" I said, my voice rough with exhaustion and worry. "Bob, it's Dr. Wilson," came the familiar voice on the other end of the line. "I have some good news. Ebenezer Scrooge is on his way with his snowplow to help you get to the hospital." I wanted to believe it was true with all my being, for Martha's and our baby's sake. "Scrooge," I repeated, my brow furrowing. "Are you sure he'll make time for this?" The storm is only getting worse, and Martha's contractions are coming closer together. Dr. Wilson's voice was calm and reassuring, a lifeline in the chaos of the night. "Bob, I know Ebenezer Scrooge better than most. He won't let us down, not when lives are at stake. If he says he's coming, he'll be there. You have to trust him." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the fear that threatened to choke me. Briefly, I wondered how she knew Scrooge well enough to make this assessment. The curiosity was quickly pushed aside as I focused on what else she had said. That Scrooge wouldn't let us down. I glanced at Martha, who was in so much pain, and I thought of Scrooge's realm of responsibility. Scrooge was cheap and miserly and only bought enough chicken food to get us through 2 weeks, but he never left work undone, and he always provided for his herd. He didn't starve them to save money, and he didn't skimp on their care. That made him a man of honor in my book, because animals wouldn't have judged him or hated him or even understood their neglect at his hand if he'd chosen to take that path, and he never took that path. "I do trust him," I said softly, my eyes drifting to Martha's face, contorted with pain. "I just hope he gets here soon." "He will," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "Now, I need you to stay calm and keep Martha as comfortable as possible. I'll see you both at the hospital soon." I hung up the phone with a shaking hand, my mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. I moved to the window, peering out into the swirling snow, hoping to catch a glimpse of headlights in the darkness. Before I could take more than a step, Martha's hand reached for mine. "Bob," she gasped, "I need you." I was at her side in an instant, my heart pounding as I took in the sheen of sweat on her brow and the way her body trembled with each contraction. "I'm here, love," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere." Martha nodded, her eyes squeezing shut as another wave of pain washed over her. "They're getting stronger," she managed through gritted teeth. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." Panic rose in my throat, but I forced it down. "Help is on the way," I said, trying to inject some confidence into my voice. "Scrooge is coming with his plow. We'll get you to the hospital, I promise." Martha's eyes flew open, surprise and disbelief warring on her face. "Scrooge?" she repeated, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "But why would he?" Because he's a good man, I said, the words feeling strange in the air like Halloween decorations up at Christmas. Because he cares about us, even if he doesn't show it. Martha didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway, her fingers tightening around mine as another contraction hit. For the next half hour, we waited in tense silence. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and Martha's labored breathing. I tried to distract her with stories of our future, of the life we would build together with our new baby. No matter what beautiful picture I painted with my words, I could feel the weight of my own fear and uncertainty pressing down on me. Just as I was about to give in to despair, I heard it. The rumble of a diesel engine, the crunch of tires on snow. I leaped to my feet, my heart pounding as I raced to the window. There, just down that lane, was Scrooge's Ford. His tall frame hunched over the steering wheel as he navigated the treacherous drifts. The plow cut through the snow like an ice cream scoop. I felt a surge of relief so intense it nearly brought me to my knees, and I turned to Martha with a grin that threatened to split my face in two. "He's here," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Scrooge is here." Martha's eyes widened. "Thank God," she whispered, her hand coming to rest on the swell of her belly. I raced to the door, throwing it open just as Scrooge emerged from the truck. On the short walk to our front door, his coat and hat were covered in a layer of snow. His face was set in a determined scowl. I'd seen that scowl before. It was the look he had when he took on Mother Nature, death, and all the chaos that always seemed to threaten life on the ranch. Scrooge faced them all head on, ready to go to battle. I'd never been so happy to see the look because tonight he was fighting for my wife and child, for me. My heart filled with gratitude, so intense it made my throat ache. "Mr. Scrooge," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I can't thank you enough for coming. I don't know what we would have done without you." Scrooge grunted, too focused to make polite conversation. I almost laughed because it was so him. His eyes flicked to Martha's prone form on the couch. "What are you standing there for?" He barked at me, pushing past me and into the house. "We need to get her to the hospital now." I nodded, scrambling to grab Martha's coat and boots as Scrooge knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her forehead with a gentleness that astonished the both of us. "It's going to be all right, Martha," he said, his voice low and soothing. "We're going to get you and the baby to safety, I promise." Martha nodded, her eyes shining with tears as Scrooge scooped her into his arms, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. "There's no time to dig out your truck. I'll drive." I nodded. He was right, of course. I draped her coat over her shoulders, my hands shaking as I helped Scrooge bundle her up against the cold. Together, we made our way outside. I walked ahead, dragging my feet to make tracks that were easy for Scrooge to follow. His steps are sure and steady despite the treacherous footing. He placed Martha gently on the bench seat, making sure she was comfortable before gesturing for me to climb in beside her. I did as he asked, gathering Martha into my arms and holding her close as Scrooge slammed the door and hurried around to the driver's side. I leaned against the door, the handle digging into my side. Martha leaned into me. I would have laid on knives for this woman if that's what it took to make her comfortable. At this moment, the engine roared to life, and we began to move. I ran my hand down Martha's hair and whispered sweet nothings, telling her how brave and amazing she was to manage all this. I told her I was lucky to have her as my wife and that she was going to be the best mother in the whole world. This baby was lucky to have her. I was lucky to have her. Scrooge kept his face straight ahead, his focus on making sure we didn't drive off the road. I don't know if he heard me, and I didn't care. Martha's body tensed, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Bob," she whimpered, her face contorting with pain. "I think the baby's coming." My eyes flew to Scrooge's face, but to my surprise he looked calm and focused, his jaw set in a determined line. "Just hold on, Martha," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You can do this." "We're almost there. Just a few more miles." I nodded, tightening my arms around my wife and whispering words of encouragement into her ear. I could feel the heat of Scrooge's gaze on us, the intensity of his concern and determination palpable in the close confines of the truck. Our eyes met over the top of Martha's head, and I felt a sense of kinship with the man beside me that I had never experienced before, a sense of shared purpose, of a bond forged in the crucible of crisis and compassion. I knew that whatever happened, whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Scrooge wouldn't leave me, not until this was all over, not until he knew if my family was okay. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew. Having him stand with me at this time was the strength I needed to get through this.
Chapter 14. As read by Emily. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I paced the empty emergency room entrance, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor. The ambulance parking loomed before me, a set of automatic doors that remained stubbornly closed, no matter how hard I willed the Cratchits to arrive and push them to open. I glanced at my watch for the 100th time, the minutes ticking by with agonizing slowness. It had been over an hour since I'd spoken to Bob, since I'd heard the desperation and fear in his voice as he described Martha's condition. And still, there was no sign of them, no headlights or honking horn heralding their arrival. I tried to distract myself by going over the preparations I had made, the carefully arranged equipment and supplies that waited in the delivery room down the hall. The incubator, with its soft blankets and tiny hat, ready to welcome a premature baby into the world. The monitoring devices, their screens dark and silent, waiting to spring to life. But even as I mentally catalogued each item, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I knew all too well the risks of a preterm birth, the delicate balance between life and death that teetered on each passing minute. I forced myself to take a deep breath, the sterile hospital air filling my lungs and doing little to calm my racing heart. I could hear the faint sound of Christmas carols playing through the speakers overhead, a jarring contrast to the tension that hung heavy in the air. The hospital was unusually quiet, the halls empty save for the occasional nurse or orderly hurrying by on some urgent errand. Most of the patients were already asleep, tucked away in their rooms with visions of sugar plums dancing in their heads, and the visitors had long since gone home, driven away by the worsening weather and the promise of a warm bed old St. Nick's visit tonight. But for me there would be no rest, no cozy fireside or twinkling tree, not until Martha and her baby were safe, not until I had done everything in my power to ensure their well-being. Suddenly, a flash of light caught my eye and I whirled around to face the darkness. Through the swirling snow, I could just make out the glow of headlights, the distant rumble of a plow against asphalt growing louder with each passing second. My heart leaped into my throat, and I lunged for the emergency button on the wall, slamming my palm against it with enough force to make my bones ache. Instantly, the hospital sprang to life, alarms blaring and lights flashing as nurses in pink scrubs poured into the hallway, their faces set with determination. I barely registered their presence, my eyes fixed on the doors as they slid open with a soft whoosh. The icy wind hit me, snowflakes swirling around me in a dizzying dance as I stumbled forward with the wheelchair, my heart pounding in my ears. And then I saw them. Bob, his face pale and drawn, cradling Martha in his arms as he carried her towards the waiting wheelchair. Martha, her face contorted in pain, her hands clutching at her swollen belly as another contraction tore through her. I raced towards them, pushing a wheelchair through the small drift of snow that blew in under the overhang. My hands shook as I helped Bob lower Martha into the chair, her skin hot and clammy. "I've got her," I said, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Let's go." Together Bob and I pushed through the doors and down the hallway, the wet wheelchair's wheels squeaking as we pushed it toward the delivery room. I could hear Martha's labored breathing, each gasp punctuated by a low moan of pain that made my heart clench in sympathy. She'd been through it and was probably terrified for her baby. I risked a glance over my shoulder, my eyes searching for the one who had made this moment possible. And there he was, standing alone in the swirling snow, his tall frame illuminated by the harsh glow of the truck's headlights. His worn jeans and plaid flannel shirt under a Carhartt coat were so typically him and so handsome, my mind whirled back to when my heart was his. Tonight, he'd shown the man I had always known he could be, the one with a heart big enough to move mountains and brave enough to face the fiercest of storms. I caught his eye, and for a moment, the rest of the world fell away, the snow and the wind and the urgent cries of the nurses fading into the background. In that instant, I saw the boy I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the one with the crooked smile and the mischievous glint in his eye. "Thank you," I mouthed the words. To my surprise, he tipped his hat in response, and my heart skipped a beat. Even as I savored the moment, the reality of the situation came crashing back down around me. A monitor beeped, loud and insistent. I tore my gaze away from Scrooge and dove into the room, my hands moving with practiced efficiency. The room was a flurry of activity, with nurses and orderlies swarming around us. I called orders, my voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Martha trembled in the bed. She gripped Bob's fingers like a lifeline. Bob's usually jovial features were now drawn and haggard. "Let's hope the hardest part was getting here," I said softly with a smile. I put my hand on Martha's shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "We're going to take good care of you and your baby, I promise." Even as the words left my lips, I knew they were a hollow reassurance, a platitude offered more for my own benefit than theirs. The truth was, I had no idea what the next few hours would bring, no way of knowing if Martha and her child would survive the ordeal that lay ahead. As I began my examination, my mind raced with the possibilities and complications that could arise. Premature labor, placental abruption, fetal distress, the list went on, each potential crisis more daunting than the last. I didn't know why her body decided to deliver the baby tonight. It could have been any number of reasons, and I wanted to rule out the worst of them as quickly as possible. I let my training take over, my hands moving with a surety and precision that belied the churning of my gut. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, each minute stretching out into eternity as we worked to stabilize Martha and prepare for the delivery. I could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken fear that hung heavy in the air like music no one wanted to listen to. Through it all, Bob remained a constant presence at Martha's side, his hand never leaving hers, his voice a low, soothing murmur of encouragement and love. As I watched them together, I felt a sudden, fierce rush of admiration for the strength of their bond and the depth of their commitment to each other and their unborn child. It was a love that made me ache with a longing I had long since tried to bury, a yearning for the kind of connection and companionship that had once seemed within my grasp. "Eben." I blinked hard and told the memories of his love to wait out in the waiting room with the man himself. Martha was ready to deliver this baby. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders, my jaw set with determination as I met Bob's gaze across the bed. "All right," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Let's do this." As the next contraction hit, a sense of purpose settled over me like a cloak, a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. And as I guided Martha through the breathing exercises and coached Bob through his role as her support, I sent up a silent prayer to the Lord for all of us. Please, I thought, please, let them be okay. Let this child come into the world healthy and whole, surrounded by the love and strength of its family. As I watched Martha bear down with determination and courage, I kept one eye on the baby's heart monitor and another on hers. Both were strong. The child was so small it took no time at all for him to enter the world. He was blue and quiet. I handed him to the specialist, and I felt a rush of joy and relief so intense it brought tears to my eyes. I finished helping Martha and getting her settled. There were so many things that could have gone wrong tonight. Martha could have delivered at home. The truck could have gotten stuck in the storm. The baby could have been breech. The list went on, but despite the obstacles, he was in the middle of his first steroid treatment to stimulate his lungs so they would grow and start to pink up. Miracles were possible. Even in the darkest of nights and the fiercest of storms, there was always a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption and renewal. "Let's get this baby to Mama," said the specialist as she laid the little bundle in Martha's arms. I watched through tear-filled eyes as love and wonder bloomed across Martha and Bob's exhausted faces. This, right here, this was what mattered most. The love and connection that bound us together, the moments of grace and beauty that made life worth living. Somewhere not so deep in my heart, the love for Eben reached up from the grave I'd buried it in. Instead of telling it to lay back down and stomping on the dirt to make sure it stayed 6 feet under, I bid them to come forth. Perhaps it was the peace that came after a harrowing night that made it possible for me to feel these feelings again without the fear that usually accompanied them. Or perhaps it was the look in Eben's eyes when he tipped his hat at me that said my feelings weren't the only ones long buried.
Chapter 15. As read by Eben. I pulled my truck into a spot near the hospital entrance, the tires crunching on the ice as I shifted into park. The storm had not let up. The snow fell just as heavy as my heart. I climbed out of the cab and pulled my coat tighter around me, hunching my shoulders against the wind as I made my way towards the automatic doors, my boots leaving deep imprints in the fresh powder. The sudden change in temperature as I entered the lobby made my skin tingle and my eyes water. I blinked, trying to orient myself in the bright, sterile space, my gaze automatically seeking out the signs that would point me toward the cafeteria. I needed a jolt of caffeine and the comforting warmth of the mug in my hands. I needed something to anchor me, to steady the racing of my heart and the churning of my thoughts. I followed the arrows down the long, quiet hallway, the scent of antiseptic and floor wax tickling my nostrils. The hospital was eerily still at this hour, the usual bustle of nurses and orderlies replaced by a hushed, almost reverent silence. I pushed open the door to the cafeteria, the hinges squeaking softly in the empty room. The space was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights above the serving line casting a sickly green glow over the tables and chairs. I made my way to the coffee station, my hands shaking slightly as I reached for a styrofoam cup and filled it with the dark, steaming liquid. I added a sugar packet and a splash of creamer, more out of habit than any real desire for sweetness. I sank into a chair at a nearby table, the hard plastic digging into my back as I hunched over the mug, inhaling the rich, earthy aroma. I took a sip, the heat scalding my tongue and the roof of my mouth. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Bob and Martha, of the tiny, fragile life that hung in the balance in this very building. I found myself silently praying, pleading with the Lord Jesus to keep that little one safe, to give him the strength to fight and survive. Time seemed to stretch and warp as I sat there, the minutes dragging by with agonizing slowness. I sipped my coffee, the liquid growing cold and bitter in my mouth as I stared at the wall, my eyes tracing the cracks in the plaster and the smudges on the paint. I was so lost in my own thoughts that I almost didn't hear the gentle creak of the door as it swung open or the soft footsteps approaching. The part of me that was always attuned to Emily perked up, and I lifted my head to find her standing near. Her hair came loose from its bun and her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Even in her weariness, even in the harsh light of the cafeteria, she was still the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I rose to my feet without thinking, my chair scraping loudly against the linoleum. I crossed the room in a few long strides, my hands reaching for the coffee pot and a clean mug. I poured the coffee with a steadiness that surprised me. I added a splash of milk and a packet of honey just the way I remembered she liked it. I turned and handed her the mug, our fingers brushing for the briefest of moments. The spark of awareness was still there. The connection we'd always shared where words weren't necessary had me delving into her beautiful eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice hoarse with fatigue. She sank into the nearest chair, her shoulders sagging. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the gentle thud of cups against the tabletop as we sipped our coffee. I couldn't take my eyes off her, couldn't stop drinking in the sight of her like a man brought back to life. Beneath the wonder and the joy of being in her presence again, a knot of tension grew in my gut. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the answer I both longed for and dreaded. "How are they?" I asked, my voice rough and halting. "Martha and the baby, will they be all right?" Emily looked up at me, her hazel eyes dark with emotion. And then, to my utter shock and amazement, she smiled. A real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face and made my heart stutter in my chest. "They're going to be just fine, Eben," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "The baby, a beautiful little boy, is doing remarkably well. He'll need to stay in the hospital for a couple of weeks to make sure his lungs are fully developed and he's gaining weight properly, but the specialist is very optimistic about his prognosis." I felt a rush of relief so intense it made my head spin, a weight lifting off my chest. I sagged back in my chair, my eyes squeezing shut as I sent up a silent prayer of thanks. That's incredible news," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't even imagine what Bob and Martha must be feeling right now." Emily nodded, her smile softening with understanding. "They're overjoyed, of course. Exhausted and a little overwhelmed, but so very happy. They have you to thank for that, you know." I blinked, taken aback by her words. Me? She reached across the table, her hand coming to rest on top of mine. Her skin was warm and soft, her touch sending a jolt of electricity up my arm and straight to my heart. "You saved them, Eben," she said softly, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and wonder. "If you hadn't braved that storm, if you hadn't gotten them here when you did, they wouldn't have made it." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. Seeing Emily's admiration warmed me all the way to my once dead center. I wanted to love her with all of me, but didn't see how that was possible. I'd turned her away, broken her heart, and caused so much pain. "I just did what needed to be done," I said gruffly, my eyes dropping to the table. Emily just shook her head, her hand tightening around mine. "No, Eben," she said firmly. "Not anyone. You did this. And it was incredible." My heart pounded as I met her gaze. I had to tell her, had to lay bare the feelings that had been growing inside me since seeing her at the church. The words were battering rams that pounded against my mouth to be let free. "Emily," I said, my voice rough and halting, I need to apologize to you. For everything. For the way I treated you, the way I pushed you away. I was so lost in my own pain and bitterness that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I couldn't see the love and the light that you brought into my life." She blinked, her eyes widening with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Ebenezer," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage I possessed. "I'm saying that I was a fool, Emily. A blind, stubborn fool who let the best thing that ever happened to me slip away. But I don't want to be that man anymore." I reached out, my hand cupping her cheek as I looked deep into her eyes. "I want to be the man you always knew I could be, Emily. The one who knows how to love and be loved. And I want to do it with you by my side." She stared at me, her lips parted in shock and wonder. For a moment, I was sure she would pull away, that she would tell me it was too late, that I had lost my chance. Miraculously, she leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed as she nuzzled her cheek against my palm. "Oh, Eben," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never stopped loving you. Even when you pushed me away, even when you shut me out, I never stopped hoping that you would find your way back to me." I felt a sob rise up in my throat, a wave of love and gratitude so intense it made my chest ache. I pulled her to me, burying my face in the crook of her neck as I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and the warmth of her skin. We stayed like that for a long moment, two hearts beating as one, two souls finding their way back to each other after years of separation and pain. As we finally pulled apart, our eyes shining with tears and joy, I knew I had been given a gift beyond measure. "I love you, Emily," I said, my voice rough and fervent. "I always have, and I always will. And if you'll have me, if you'll give me the chance to prove it to you every day for the rest of our lives, I promise I'll spend every moment making sure you never regret it." She smiled, her hand coming up to cup my cheek in a mirror of my own gesture. "I love you too, Ebenezer," she said softly. "And there's nothing I want more than to build a life with you." I leaned in, pressing my forehead against hers as I savored the feeling of her breath mingling with mine. And then, seized by a sudden impulse, I pulled back, my eyes sparkling with mischief. "In that case," I said, my voice low and playful, "would you do me the honor of being my date to Fred's Christmas party tonight?" She laughed, the sound like music to my ears. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, her eyes shining with happiness. And as we rose from the table, our hands clasped tightly together, I felt a sense of peace and purpose settle over me like a cloak. I had been given a second chance, a new beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it. Starting with showing the people I loved just how much they meant to me, just how grateful I was for their unwavering support and belief. I had a plan, a surprise that would show everyone just how much I had changed, just how much I wanted to make this Christmas one they would never forget. And I'd start with Bob Cratchit.
Chapter 16. As read by Bob. The fluorescent lights of the hospital cafeteria buzzed overhead as I pushed through the double doors, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness after the dim, hushed corridors of the maternity ward.
The scent of coffee and bacon wafted through the air, mingling with the faint antiseptic smell that seemed to cling to every surface in the building. I paused for a moment, getting my bearings. The exhaustion of the long, sleepless night still clung to my bones, but the joy and relief that filled my heart were like a shot of adrenaline, keeping me upright and moving despite the weariness that threatened to overtake me. The sunlight filtering through the large windows seemed to mirror the happiness that radiated from every fiber of my being, casting the room in a soft, golden glow that felt almost surreal in its beauty. I couldn't help but smile as I made my way towards the serving line, my steps light and buoyant despite the weight of the past few hours. As I loaded my tray with eggs and toast, my mind drifted back to Martha, to the sight of her lying in that hospital bed, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes shining with a love and strength that took my breath away. Dr. Wilson had assured me that she was doing well, that the delivery had gone as smoothly as could be expected given the circumstances. "She's a fighter," she had said, her hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture of comfort and support. "And with a little rest and care, she'll be back on her feet in no time." And then there was our son, our perfect, precious little boy, born too soon, but already showing the same stubborn determination as his mother. Dr. Wilson had taken me to see him in the NICU, where they'd moved him shortly after our introduction, his tiny frame dwarfed by the incubator and the tangle of wires and tubes that kept him alive. Even through the fear and the worry that gripped my heart, I could see the strength in him, the fierce will to survive that burned bright in his delicate features. "He's doing well, Bob," Dr. Wilson had said, her voice soft and reassuring as she pointed out the steady rise and fall of his chest, the pink flush of his skin. "The steroids we gave him are helping his lungs to develop, and he's breathing on his own, which is a really good sign." I nodded, too choked with emotion to speak, my eyes fixed on the miracle before me. My son, my little Timothy, already proving himself to be a force to be reckoned with. As I made my way to an empty table, my tray piled high with food I wasn't sure I could stomach, I felt a sudden rush of gratitude wash over me. For Dr. Wilson and the nurses who had worked tirelessly to keep Martha and the baby safe, and for Ebenezer Scrooge, the man who had proven himself to be a true friend when it mattered most. I spotted him, sitting alone at a table in the corner, his head resting on his folded arms and his eyes closed in exhaustion. A pang of guilt and concern shot through me as I took in the haggard lines of his face, the dark circles beneath his eyes. He had been here through it all, waiting patiently for news. And now, seeing him like this, I realized just how much he had sacrificed, how much he had given of himself to ensure the safety of my family. I approached the table slowly, not wanting to startle him from his much-needed rest. But as I drew closer, a sudden thought struck me. The cattle, the horses, the endless chores and responsibilities that came with running a working farm. Who would take care of them now, with both Scrooge and myself away from the property? The thought of those animals suffering made my stomach clench with anxiety. I reached out and gently shook Scrooge's shoulder, hating to disturb him, but knowing that I needed to voice my concerns. "Mr. Scrooge," I said softly, my voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion, "I'm sorry to wake you, but I just realized the ranch, the animals... Someone needs to go back and take care of them." Scrooge stirred, blinking up at me with bleary eyes. For a moment, he looked confused, as if he couldn't quite place where he was or why I was standing over him. Understanding dawned on his face, and he sat up straighter, running a hand over his face to clear the cobwebs of sleep from his mind. "It's already taken care of, Bob," he said, his voice rough but filled with a warmth and kindness I had never heard before. "I called Fred at first light and asked him to go out to the ranch and handle the chores. He was more than happy to do it, said he'd stay as long as we needed him to." I stared at him, stunned into silence by the revelation. Fred, Scrooge's nephew, the man who had always been a thorn in his side. And now here he was, stepping up to help without a second thought, putting aside his own Christmas plans and commitments to ensure that the ranch would continue to run smoothly in our absence. I felt a lump form in my throat, a rush of gratitude and affection that threatened to overwhelm me. I don't know what to say, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Scrooge. Thank you for everything. Scrooge waved off my thanks with a dismissive gesture, but I could see the glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It's nothing, Bob. You've done more for me than I could ever repay. This is the least I could do. I sank into the chair across from him, my legs suddenly feeling like jelly as the events of the past few hours caught up with me all at once. You should go home, get some rest, I said, eyeing the dark circles beneath his eyes with concern. You've been up all night, and I know you must be exhausted. Scrooge shook his head, leaning forward to fix me with an intense, searching gaze. Not yet, he said, his voice low and serious. There's something I need to say to you first, Bob. Something I should have said a long time ago. My heart skipped a beat. A sudden nervousness turned my stomach. I had never seen Scrooge like this before, his usually gruff exterior stripped away. I've been a fool, Bob, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. A bitter, selfish fool who couldn't see the blessings that were right in front of him. But you've shown me what it means to be a true friend, a loyal employee, and a devoted husband and father. You've gone above and beyond what any employer could ask of you, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. You've worked yourself to the bone day in and day out, never complaining, never asking for anything in return. I wasn't anything special. I had never considered my hard work and dedication to be anything more than what was expected of me. But to hear Scrooge speak of me in such terms, to know that he had seen and appreciated the sacrifices I had made, it meant more to me than I could ever express. I don't deserve a friend like you, Bob, he said, his voice growing thick with emotion, but I am so grateful to work with you. I opened my mouth to speak, to try to find the words to convey the depth of my own gratitude and affection, but Scrooge held up a hand, cutting me off before I could begin. Which is why I've made a decision, he said, his eyes sparkling with a newfound energy and purpose. I'm going to hire more ranch hands. I'm going to lighten your workload and give you the support you need to be there for your family. And I'm going to promote you to foreman with a raise that will allow you to give Martha and your children the life they deserve. My mouth fell open in shock and disbelief. A promotion? A raise? It was more than I had ever dared to dream of, more than I had ever thought possible. I don't know what to say, I stammered, my voice cracking with emotion. Mr. Scrooge, it's so much. Scrooge cut me off with a wave of his hand, a grin spreading across his face. Consider it my Christmas gift to you, Bob, and while we're at it, take the next 2 weeks off. Spend some time with Martha and the baby and get to know your son. The ranch will still be there when you get back. I felt a rush of emotion so intense that it threatened to bring me to my knees. I had never known such generosity, such kindness and compassion. And to have it come from the man who had once been the source of so much stress and hardship in my life, it was almost too much to bear. Thank you, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the lump in my throat. Thank you, Mr. Scrooge. I don't know how I can ever repay you for this. Scrooge just shook his head, his eyes shining with a warmth and affection that I had never seen before. You already have, Bob, he said softly. More than you can ever know. Eat up. You need to get back to Martha and the baby. Of course, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But Mr. Scrooge, I just want you to know, you're not just my employer. You're my friend. And I am so grateful to have you in my life, too. Scrooge paused, his eyes searching mine for a long moment. And then, to my utter shock and amazement, he smiled. A real, genuine smile that lit up his whole face and made him look years younger, almost boyish in its joy and warmth. He stood, his arms outstretched, and I was moving to meet him, the two of us coming together in a hug that felt like the most natural thing in the world. I could feel the strength and warmth of his embrace, the solidity of his presence, and I knew in that moment that I had gained more than just a friend or an employer. I had gained a brother, a kindred spirit who had walked through the fire and come out the other side, changed and redeemed by the power of love and compassion. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Scrooge," I whispered, my voice muffled against his shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Bob," he replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "And God bless you." His hand clapped me on the shoulder one last time, and as I made my way back to Martha's room, my own steps quick and eager, I knew that this Christmas would be one I would never forget. As I pushed open the door to Martha's room, my eyes falling on the sight of my beautiful wife, I felt a rush of peace and contentment wash over me like a warm, comforting blanket. Because we had the love and connection that bound us together in the moments of grace and beauty that made life worth living.
Chapter 17. As read by Emily. I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom, smoothing down the skirt of my dress with trembling hands. The soft, forest green fabric hugged my curves, the delicate lace overlay adding a touch of elegance to the otherwise simple design. I had chosen the dress for its nod to country style, with its sweetheart neckline and the thin brown leather belt cinched at the waist. As I slipped on my favorite pair of cowboy boots, the worn leather molding to my feet like a second skin, my thoughts drifted to Eben and the unexpected turn of events that had led to this date. It still felt surreal, like a dream I might wake up from at any moment. I couldn't help but imagine the surprise on everyone's faces when we walked into the party together, hand in hand. For years, I had attended these gatherings alone, my smile bright but my heart heavy with the weight of what might have been. But now, with Eben by my side, I was excited in a way that I hadn't experienced in longer than I cared to remember. As I applied a final swipe of lip gloss, my mind wandered to the possibility of history repeating itself. What if I was setting myself up for another heartbreak? What if the magic of the moment faded, and we were left with nothing but the bitter ashes of our past? I pushed my doubts aside, focusing instead on the sincerity I had seen in Eben's eyes, the selfless act he had performed to ensure Martha's safe arrival at the hospital. The man I had seen last night, the one who had braved the storm and put the needs of others before his own, was not the same man who had broken my heart all those years ago. The doorbell interrupted my musings, and I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way down the stairs. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob, but I forced myself to be steady, to trust in the love and connection that had never quite died, despite the years of separation. The sight of Eben standing on my porch took my breath away. He was dressed in a pair of well-fitted black Wranglers, the dark denim hugging his lean, muscular frame in all the right places. His crisp white button-up shirt was tucked in at the waist, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his strong tanned forearms. But it was the look in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat, the way they softened and crinkled at the corners as he took in the sight of me. "Emily," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. You're more beautiful than ever before." I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, my skin tingling with the warmth of his gaze. "Thank you," I said softly, my eyes drinking in the sight of him. "You look pretty handsome yourself." And he did. With his dark hair tousled by the wind and his jaw shadowed with a hint of stubble, he looked every inch the rugged, country heartthrob. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a softness that I had never seen before, and it made my heart ache with a longing I had never quite been able to shake. As Eben took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine, a familiar warmth spread through my body, a sense of rightness and belonging that I had missed more than I had ever admitted to myself. In that moment, I knew that falling in love with him again would be as easy and natural as breathing. We made our way to his truck. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine and wood smoke drifting on the breeze. As Eben helped me into the passenger seat, his hand lingered on the small of my back and I shivered at the contact. The gentle pressure of his touch brought back a flood of memories, reminding me of the way he used to hold me close. I could almost feel the warmth of his embrace, the security of his arms wrapped around me, and the comfort of his heartbeat against my cheek. I remembered the countless times he had held me in moments of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. Whether we were dancing slowly under the stars, cuddling on the couch on a lazy Sunday afternoon, or seeking solace in each other's arms after a difficult day, his touch had always been my anchor. As I settled into the passenger seat, I couldn't help but long for those moments again, to be held by him and to feel the love and protection that his embrace always provided. Conversation flowed easily between us, the years melting away as we reminisced about past Christmases and the memories we had once shared. Beneath the laughter and the nostalgia, I could sense a nervousness in him. What is it? I asked gently. His eyes fixed on the road ahead, he said, I'm nervous about facing everyone tonight. It's been so long since I've been to one of these things, and after the way I've acted over the years. I reached over and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, my heart clenching at the vulnerability in his voice. Hey, I said softly, waiting until he glanced over at me to continue. I'm going to be right by your side the whole time. You're not alone in this, Eben. Not anymore. He nodded, his jaw working as he swallowed hard. I know, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I can't tell you how much that means to me, Emily, to have you here after everything. He trailed off, his eyes searching mine for a long moment. To my surprise, a mischievous grin spread across his face. Of course, the real reason I brought you was because there'll be mistletoe. I laughed, the sound bubbling up from my chest and filling the truck cab. I reached over and gave his arm a playful shove, my cheeks burning with a blush that had nothing to do with the heat blasting from the vents. You're incorrigible, I said, shaking my head even as a secret thrill raced through me at the thought. I was hoping for a little mistletoe magic myself. It had been too long since we'd been together, and I missed all of it. His strong arms, sweet words brushing against my cheek, his lips. The man knew how to kiss. As we pulled up to the party venue, a beautiful old barn that had been converted into an event space, I could feel Scrooge's grip on my hand tighten slightly. I glanced over at him, taking in the way his jaw clenched, and his eyes darted nervously toward the entrance as he took it all in. He hadn't been to this side of the ranch in a long time. Marley had made some changes. The barn was one of them. I knew at least 4 couples who got married here. She enjoyed hosting and planning events, and this was a great outlet for her talents. The house had been repainted and there were new trees. Hey, I said softly, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. We've got this. He nodded, taking a deep breath and squaring his shoulders as he put the truck into park. And then, to my surprise, he turned to face me, his eyes locking with mine in a gaze so intense it made my breath catch in my throat. I reached up and cupped his cheek. He leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a moment as he savored the contact. And then he took a deep breath, his hand coming up to cover mine as he pressed a soft kiss to my palm. Together, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I like the sound of that. He came around to open my door and took my hand in his. His grip was firm and yet gentle. As we walked into the warmth and light of the room, a sense of joy and contentment washed over me, a feeling of coming home for Christmas. Chapter 18. As read by Eben. As I stepped through the doorway of the barn, I was immediately struck by the cozy and inviting atmosphere that surrounded me. The exterior of the barn was adorned with strings of warm, twinkling lights that outlined the roof, windows, and doors, and a large, lush green wreath with a bright red bow hung on the entrance. The high vaulted ceiling was draped with sheer white fabric, softening the space and creating a dreamy ambiance. Strings of lights and garlands of fresh greenery, including pine boughs and holly woven through the rafters, filled the air with a subtle, crisp scent that reminded me of the holiday season. In the center of the room, a grand Christmas tree stood tall, adorned with glittering ornaments in shades of red, gold, and silver. The tree was topped with a gleaming star, and beneath it, beautifully wrapped presents added to the festive decor, making me feel like I had stepped into a Christmas wonderland. The walls of the barn were lined with rustic wooden tables, each covered in crisp white linens and decorated with centerpieces featuring lush green foliage, bright red berries, and flickering candlelight. I spotted sprigs of mistletoe hanging from the rafters, adding a touch of whimsy and romance to the already enchanting setting. I couldn't help but appreciate how the barn's original features, such as the weathered wooden beams and sliding barn doors, had been preserved and incorporated into the decor, adding to the rustic charm of the space. The overall effect was a perfect blend of country charm and Christmas magic, creating an unforgettable setting for a holiday celebration that I knew I would cherish for years to come. As Emily and I stepped into the warmth and light of the party, a hush fell over the room, the chatter and laughter died away as all eyes turned to us. I could feel the weight of their stares. I wasn't sure what was more of a surprise, the fact that I'd shown up or me and Emily together. For a moment, the old fear and self-consciousness, the desire to turn and flee back into the safety of solitude filled me up. I was about to give in, to spin on the heel of my cowboy boot and hightail it out of there, when Emily's hand tightened around mine, her warmth and strength anchoring me to the present, and I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Just as the silence stretched into awkwardness, a booming voice cut through the room, shattering the tension like a hammer through glass. Uncle Eben. Fred barreled towards me, his face split in a grin so wide it looked like it might crack his cheeks. Before I could even brace myself, he threw his arms around me, crushing me in a bear hug that knocked the wind from my lungs. For a moment, I stood there stiffly, my arms hanging at my sides as I tried to process the sudden onslaught of affection. Slowly, tentatively, I raised my arms and wrapped them around Fred's broad shoulders, returning the embrace with a fierceness that surprised even me. "It counts now, right?" I quipped, my voice muffled against Fred's sweater. "The hug, I mean. You said it only counts if I hug you back." Fred's laughter boomed out so loud and joyful that it filled the entire room. "It counts, Uncle Eben," he said, pulling back to look at me with eyes that shone with happiness and pride. "It definitely counts." And just like that, the tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a warmth and camaraderie that I had almost forgotten. Emily and I made our way further into the party, and we were greeted by old friends and acquaintances, their faces alight with genuine delight at seeing me again. "Ebenezer Scrooge, as I live and breathe," exclaimed John Fezziwig, his round face creased in a smile as he clapped me on the shoulder. "I never thought I'd see the day when you'd darken the door of a Christmas party again." I felt a pang of regret at his words, a reminder of all the years I had spent pushing people away, wallowing in my own bitterness and isolation. But I forced myself to meet his gaze, to offer a smile that was only slightly tinged with apology. "Good evening, John," I replied, my voice even. "I suppose I've had a change of heart, as they say." John's eyes softened, his hand tightening on my shoulder in a gesture of understanding and forgiveness. "We've missed you, Ebenezer," he said quietly. "More than you know." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't deserve the kindness, but I would take it. Throughout the evening, Emily remained a constant source of support and comfort, her free hand often coming to rest on my arm or my side, a gentle reminder that she was there, that I was not alone. And each time I felt her touch, each time I met her warm, loving gaze, I felt a rush of gratitude and wonder. As the party swirled on around us, I slowly relaxed into the rhythm of conversation and laughter, the unfamiliar sensations of joy and connection seeping into my bones like a warm balm. It was exhilarating and exhausting all at once, navigating the social currents that I had avoided for so long. But even as I felt myself beginning to flag, my energy sapped by the constant interaction and stimulation, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single moment. Because this was what I had been missing all those lonely years. This sense of belonging, of being a part of something greater than myself. It was during a lull in the conversation that I noticed Marley slipping away from the main room, her slender form disappearing into the kitchen with a swish of her skirts. Seized by a sudden impulse, I excused myself from the group I had been chatting with and followed her, my heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. I found her standing at the counter, her back to me as she arranged trays of hors d'oeuvres with quick, practiced movements. For a moment, I just stood there, drinking in the sight of her, marveling at the strength and grace that seemed to radiate from her very being. As if sensing my presence, she turned to face me, her eyes widening in surprise as she took in my hesitant smile and the way my hands twisted nervously in front of me. "Ebenezer," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came." I took a step forward, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. "Marley," I said, my voice rough and halting. I need to say something to you. Something I should have said a long time ago." She nodded, her eyes never leaving mine as she waited for me to continue. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry for all the years I wasted, for all the pain and heartache I caused you. I was so wrapped up in my own bitterness and anger that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I couldn't see the love and support that you and Fred and everyone else were trying to give me." Marley's lips trembled as she listened to my words. She reached out and took my hand in hers, her fingers warm and soft against my skin. "Oh, Ebenezer," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never gave up on you. Not really." There was more I needed to say, more that I needed to do to make things right. "Marley," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been thinking a lot about the ranch, about the way things used to be when Mom and Dad were still alive. And I think it's time we brought the family back together." Marley's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking to life in their depths. "What do you have in mind, Eben?" I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of rightness settle over me like a cloak. "I'm saying that I want to reunite the ranch. I want us to work together again to build something that would make Mom and Dad proud. And Bob Cratchit should be the foreman. He's earned it, and he has a family to support now, a new baby." Marley's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips as tears began to stream down her cheeks. "Oh, Eben," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy and disbelief. "Do you really mean it? Do you really think we can make it work?" I nodded, feeling a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. "I do, Marley. I really do. It won't be easy, and we'll have a lot of work ahead of us. But I think it's what we were meant to do. What we were always meant to be." And then, before I could even blink, Marley was in my arms, her face buried in my chest as she clung to me like a lifeline. I held her close, feeling the warmth of her tears soaking through my shirt, the shuddering of her thin shoulders as she wept with a mix of relief and happiness. We stayed like that for a long moment, two siblings reunited after years of estrangement, and our bond was strengthened by forgiveness and a shared vision for the future. Peace washed over me like a balm. "Come on," Marley said, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "We should probably get this food out to the table before people start to wonder what happened to us." I chuckled, feeling a rush of warmth and camaraderie that I had almost forgotten could exist. "Lead the way," I said, grabbing a tray of tiny quiches and falling into step beside her. As we emerged from the kitchen, the party in full swing, I couldn't help but feel that this was where I was meant to be, surrounded by the people I loved, working towards a future that was brighter and more hopeful than I had ever dared to dream. My eyes sought out Emily in the crowd, my heart swelling with love and gratitude as I watched her mingle with the other guests, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She was radiant in the soft glow of the Christmas lights, her blonde hair cascading down her back in gentle waves, her hazel eyes sparkling with joy and affection. Her smile widened as she caught my eye. I grinned back like the fool I was. Marley, noticing the direction of my gaze, nudged me with her elbow. "You know," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, "I think I saw some mistletoe hanging up over by the doorway earlier. Might be worth investigating." I felt a flush creep up my neck, but I couldn't quite suppress the grin that tugged at my lips. "You know what, Marley?" I said, setting down the tray of quiches and squaring my shoulders. "I think you might be onto something there." I strode across the room, my eyes locked on Emily's as I closed the distance between us. She watched me approach, her head tilted to the side in a silent question, her lips curved in a smile that was equal parts amused and intrigued. I took her hand in mine, marveling at the way her delicate fingers fit so perfectly in my grasp. As I looked into Emily's eyes, I saw a flicker of anticipation, a silent question that hung between us. "Emily," I said, my voice low and filled with a yearning I could no longer deny. "There's something I've been wanting to do all evening." Her breath hitched, and she tilted her head slightly, a subtle invitation. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I led her across the room, weaving through the other guests until we reached the doorway. Above us, a sprig of mistletoe hung, its green leaves and white berries a promise of something more. I turned to face her, our bodies inches apart. "I've been wanting to do this," I murmured, reaching to cup her cheek in my hand. My thumb brushed over her soft skin, tracing the curve of her cheekbone. Emily's eyes fluttered closed, and a soft sigh escaping her lips. I lowered my head, my lips hovering just above hers. "Merry Christmas, my love," I whispered, giving her one last chance to pull away. Instead of backing out, she closed the distance between us, pressing her lips to mine in a kiss that set my soul on fire. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her closer as I deepened the kiss. Her hands slid up my chest, twining around my neck as she melted into me. Dimly, I was aware of the other guests reacting around us, their voices rising in a chorus of oohs and ahs and good-natured whistles. But none of that mattered. In that moment, the world fell away, and all that existed was Emily, the warmth of her body pressed against mine, the sweetness of her kiss, and the promise of a future together that stretched out before us, as endless and beautiful as the love that we shared. As I looked out at the sea of smiling faces around us, at the twinkling lights and the glittering ornaments, I felt a swell of emotion rise up in my chest, a feeling of gratitude and love so intense that it brought tears to my eyes. "Merry Christmas!" I called out, my voice ringing through the room like a bell. "Merry Christmas, one and all!" The guests echoed my sentiment, their voices joining together in a chorus of joy and celebration, and I knew that I had finally found my way home. that the bitterness and anger that had once consumed me had been replaced by the love and grace of something greater than myself, something that had the power to heal even the most broken of hearts. I was a new man, a better man, a man who had been given a second chance at life and love. As I stood there, my arm around Emily's waist and my heart full to bursting, I knew that I would spend the rest of my days cherishing this gift, this miracle that had brought me back to the light. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly happy, truly at peace. My heart lifted in a simple prayer, may God bless us everyone.
Hello, dear listener. I want to take a moment to thank you for joining me on this festive adventure. Writing this Christmas cowboy romance was a labor of love, and knowing you've shared this story means the world to me. If you've enjoyed following our Cowboy Scrooge's journey toward love and redemption, I'd be so grateful if you could share the magic with others. Whether it's through a review, liking this video, or simply recommending my channel to a friend, your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Wishing you all the warmth, love, and joy that this season has to offer. Keep the Christmas spirit close, and remember, there's always more romance waiting for you in my next story. With heartfelt thanks, Lucy. You've been listening to A Cowboy Scrooge Worth Saving. Written by Lucy McConnell and read by several AI-generated voices.